Members of the public can view this meeting live on Channel 8, the city's website, and YouTube channels. Live Spanish translation services are being provided for tonight's council meeting by telephone. Please dial 720-386-9023 and use code 104091 *. If you're a council member, please be sure to unmute your microphone when speaking for the broadcast and recording. The chat function is disabled. We don't have a chat function. City clerk is the host. We don't have a Zoom meeting anywhere. This time we'll call the meeting to order. Ask City Clerk to call the roll.
Mayor Huseman.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas.
Present.
Councilmember Madera. Councilmember Davis. Councilmember Noble.
Present.
Councilmember Hurst.
Present.
Councilmember Grimes.
Present.
Councilmember Ford.
Present.
Councilmember Douglas.
Present.
Mayor Huseman, you have a quorum. And just as a reminder, council members, for the broadcast and the recording, please unmute your microphones when you're speaking. Thank you.
This time I'm looking for a motion and a second to excuse those members not present. Councilmember Hurst.
So moved.
Councilmember Grimes.
I'll second the motion.
I have a motion and a second to excuse those members not present. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries unanimously. This time, I'd like to invite those present and remote to join us in a moment of silence, as well as the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All public comment will occur during citizen communication except for public hearings. Persons who registered to speak under multiple items will be allowed to speak multiple times. First item on our agenda is citizen communication. Per council policy, citizen communication is the time on our agenda for the public to address council on business and affairs of the city. Per council policy, citizen communication cannot occur before the time stated in the agenda without council approval. The estimated time in the agenda for citizen communication is 6:30 p.m. The time is now 6:33 p.m. No further action needs to be taken. City Council is not able to hear any comments at this time on land use matters that are before or may come before council. Please reserve such comments for the appropriate public hearing. As a reminder, we take your comments seriously, but do not generally respond to comments until later in the evening. Council must wait until administrative council business to take action in response to citizen communication. Council members can ask questions of speakers if desired. The city needed advanced registration in order to participate in citizen communication for this meeting. If you are currently in this meeting to speak during citizen communication, please listen for me to call your name and the clerk will unmute you so you may begin. If you do not respond or are disconnected, you may miss your chance to comment. Please give your name and address for the record and keep your comments limited to 3 minutes. If a council member wants to ask questions, please ask to be recognized when the speaker is finished. Thank you. Tonight we have 2 speakers. The first is Rana Sanchez.
Rana, you should be able to unmute yourself, and you'll have 3 minutes once you begin. Rana, we're having trouble hearing you. Give me just one moment, please. All right, Rana, let's try that one more time if you don't mind for me.
Okay, can you hear me any better?
We can, yes. Thank you, Rana.
Okay, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you this evening. First, I'd like to congratulate the newly elected council members, Oscar Madera, Sean Ford, Rick Davis, and Christy Douglas. I wish you the best in your new roles. I'm speaking tonight to ask you to support having public hearings for the 2 new plats that are being requested. I'm referring to the one at 112th and Chambers and the one at 96th and Tower. The reason I think there needs to be a public hearing is simple. It is important to hear what the people of Commerce City want and how they feel about this. You were all elected by the citizens of Commerce City, and I would think you would want to hear what they have to say. The last election was fairly recent. Please don't forget who votes. The staff of Commerce City would just give administrative approval, who would just give administrative approval were not elected by the citizens. The citizens should have a say in what is built here. I don't know why you would not want to hear from the residents of Commerce City. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. Does anyone on council have any questions for the speaker? Seeing none, thank you again for your time this evening. Next up to speak is Steve Douglas, who is going to speak once for general citizen communication and once for resolution 2021-109.
Steve, you should be able to unmute yourself, and you'll have 3 minutes once you begin for each one. We'll start with general citizen communication first.
Thank you. Good evening, council. And to the newly elected officials, Oscar Madera, Sean Ford, Rick Davis, and Christy Douglas. I will hold my comments until, as far as the 2 plots, what I have to speak on tonight, I have to wait until there's a hearing. So, but I just wanted to welcome the new council, and just remember, you were voted in to represent the people and Commerce City. Thank you.
All right, Steve, and then when you're ready for resolution 2021-109.
Thank you. This has to do with the resolutions for the award of contracts for citywide custodial services. The only reason why I bring this up, because when I was on council and Bison Ridge was getting ready to open, any projects that were under the 2K tax dollars, we were looking at that time, adding city employees and not contracted services to do those jobs. And I just wanted to hear, well, I will listen to hear, since I'm talking before, any kind of reasoning on why all the municipal services now are going to be contracted and not look towards having city employees in those roles. So that's all in my statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Douglas. Does anybody on council have any questions for Mr. Douglas? Seeing none, we thank you again for your time this evening. Thank you all for speaking with us tonight. If follow-up is necessary, you should expect to be contacted by a staff member. Members of the public were also able to submit comments online and by mail. Written comments received by the deadline were incorporated into the updated agenda packet. If anyone wishes to speak at a future council meeting, please check the meeting agenda and city website for information on how to register or submit written comments. Next on the agenda is noticed council business. We have 2 items here. First is Settlers Crossing, filing number 3, request for approval of a subdivision plat. I'd like to invite Jim Tolbert, Community Development Director, to introduce the request.
Give us just a moment here, Mayor, while we move Jim over. Jim, you should be able to unmute your microphone and start your video camera. Give me just a minute to put you up on the projector screen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This first item is a subdivision that we received. 96 Tower LLC has submitted a request for Settlers Crossing, filing number 3, subdivision final plat that would create 154 residential lots and 11 tracts. The property is located at the northeast corner of East 96th Avenue and Tower Road and is zoned PUD. This process tonight, this has been placed here for decision as to whether or not council would like to start the public hearing process, whether or not you would require that. As this process would lead to a de novo quasi-judicial hearing, there should be no substantial discussion of the merits of the case, opinions, or recommendations or presentation of facts at this time. If council elects to approve the public hearing request, planning commission will hear the case, presentation of facts and comments, opinions, and make a recommendation to council for final decision making.
Thank you, Mr. Tolbert. Councilmember Noble, do you have a motion to make?
I do. I move to call Settlers Crossing Filing Number 3 Subdivision Final Plat to create 154 residential lots and 11 tracts for the property located at the northeast corner of East 96th Avenue and Tower Road, zoned PUD Planned Unit District, for a city council hearing.
I have a motion to bring up the administrative subdivision case for Settlers Crossing filing number 3 for public hearings at both the Planning Commission and the City Council. Is there a second?
I will second that, please.
I have a motion and a second to do so. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Hurst.
If during that hearing, we hear from the public that they don't like this, what are their actions that they can take? I guess I'll clarify my question. We don't own the property. It fits into our PUD. All the city has the ability to do is say if it fits into all the PUD requirements or not. So what actions can we take if we hear that the community doesn't like this?
Mr. Tolbert, are you prepared to answer that?
I can't answer that. I wasn't sure who the question was directed to. I mean, the approval of a subdivision is a ministerial function. If it meets all the requirements of the zoning code and all the land development code, then council is pretty much bound to approve it at that point.
Anything else? Any other questions? Discussion?
I have a question.
Councilmember Douglas.
Yes, so if the community comes forward and they do not like what they see because they feel that it will be detrimental to the community going forward, then the council is bound by the approval of the staff as it stands, or the recommendation for approval of the staff as it stands? Is that what you're saying?
If it meets all the requirements in the code, the time to approve or not approve is really in the zoning process. The subdivision is implementing the zoning. And again, it's a ministerial function that if the developer submits it and it meets all the requirements, then there's no basis for this approval.
As it stands, though, there's a sign that's posted that says that the public has the opportunity to speak out until September 13th, I believe.
I'm sorry, I could not understand the question then.
Right now, there's a sign that's posted that allows the public to make comment until September 13th. So is that moot?
I mean, no, the public has, under our process, the public has a right to raise issues and determine if a public hearing is necessary. It does not, though, change the fact that if it meets all the conditions, that it should be approved. Hello?
Mayor, if I may just provide some additional clarification to Mr. Tolbert's answer. In addition to that, we have as part of our approval criteria or criteria for calling up an administrative subdivision plat to it being technical in nature related to various impacts, and we have those as 9 approval criteria. What's also called out is that the written objection that is stated against that proposed subdivision general objections regarding land use, zoning, or issues unrelated to the subdivision will not be considered valid objections for the purpose of being able to be called up for a planning commission city council public hearing. So it has to be specific to, for instance, is there the provision of enough utilities to support the new growth and development associated with that subdivision plan? Does the subdivision create a transportation impact that is not mitigable or has not been able to be addressed by the applicant? Those are examples under our statutes that we have for our land development code.
And if I may elaborate just a little further, I think it's important to know that if the case gets called up, then what happens is you're having a quasi-judicial hearing. You are taking the facts and applying them to the criteria to determine if it should be approved or not. So in your question, you asked about a staff report. If staff provides a report or recommendation on the case, then that's all that is. It's their analysis of whether they believe the facts meet the approval criteria, and then based on that, possibly a recommended motion. But ultimately, you are making that determination. Staff is not making that determination if the council gets called up. It's no longer administrative approval. It's city council approval, or based on the recommendation of the planning commission.
Councilmember Noble.
I'd like to point out that we did this on November 15th for another plat that will be coming forward for a council hearing. This plat is in my ward, so I am asking for this as a courtesy from my colleagues. And I would like to point out that we can't say too much this evening because we are advised council members should not discuss the merits of the case, and council members should not make any statements suggesting they have prejudged the application. So I feel a bit constrained to make any arguments beyond what I just said.
Councilmember Hurst.
In a public hearing where we've bypassed the administrative approval process, and we are now judging by the technical, in technical terms, if it qualifies under the 9 qualifications. If we decide it's not qualified, what is the person the owner of the property, the developer, what is their recourse to challenge that expertise, to challenge that it does not qualify to meet one of those 9?
Matt.
I'll defer to the attorney on that.
So, Matt, please correct me if I'm wrong, but once a council was to take a final action on this matter, it would be available for a 106 review under the district court, and maybe you can expound upon that?
Yeah, so because council would be the final decision maker, and I need to go in and double check in the land development code, and I'll do that momentarily, but the typical recourse would be whoever is damaged, or maybe the developer thinks that they got it wrong, that you got it wrong, could file a hearing and file a motion in the district court, and then the record would go to the district court for review to determine if council abused its discretion in making that determination in terms of whether or not you followed the law or not when you made your determination.
Apologize, one last follow-up. How are the 9 qualifications decided, and are they binding, and how can they be changed?
So if I'm understanding your question correctly, are you saying where did these 9 criteria come from? So at some point, the drafters of the Land Development Code proposed those, and of course, they were at some point approved by council. I think the Land Development Code was approved in 2009. I'm not sure, but I think it was when it was last approved. And of course, it could always be amended by an action of council. Was that every part of your question, or did I miss one?
There's no baseline. We can just create 9 out of thin air.
know if we could create them out of thin air. I'd have to do some more research on that. It would raise a red flag for me to have approval criteria that are not at all related to what's actually happening, especially in the area of land use. I'm assuming there have to be somehow reasonably related to what's occurring. So it's a broad question I've not heard in the past, but I would assume some sort of relationship between the criteria and, and what's going on to make those lawful exactions, because typically, we have a lot of Supreme Court cases, about land use and the regulatory power of land use, and we're going to be limited in some way.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was getting at, is we can't just create 100 approval criteria that must be met every time we have a land use case. They have to come from somewhere. There has to be a basis of that. And of course, law and judgments from the past is what we start with. And so to me, I think the 9 are key, that there is a way for us to make changes to those if necessary. But again, I've argued in the past, and I'm going to argue again tonight, that at this point in the process, we're too late. We need to go back and examine those 9 criteria. And again, if those need to be changed, I'm all ears for argument. But at this point, the hearings have been had. The zoning's been done. There's hearings at every step of the way. This is now in compliance with everything we've asked for, then we should move forward.
To further clarify, typically criteria such as this comes out of either state law or case law. And in the case of case law, you certainly know what courts will approve and won't approve. So you're absolutely right that the City Council has the power to amend the land use code to change the 9 criteria. And that's the basis for staff decision, is based on those 9 criteria. So that's set by the City Council, and it's the City's council authority and prerogative to change those criteria. But again, we would advise, being compliant with case law and try to stay in compliance with state law as well, even though we're a home rule city.
Councilmember Douglas.
So this is the same thing that I've heard time and time again. I was recently elected, and I ran a grassroots campaign, which meant that I talked to the people. And one of their biggest complaints is that they're not being heard, that they have no opportunity to be heard. And so to deny them a public hearing, the right to a public hearing, I think is unfair.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got to agree with Councilmember Hurst. We're really way past making the decision to not approve a plat like this or a subdivision filing like this. And I think the root of the problem is the land development code. And if we want to make changes to that, I think that's the appropriate course of action, to take that under review and make suggestions and changes there. But I think bringing these types of filings to a hearing once they've already met the criteria at the administrative level opens the city to a lot of liability if we think there's any possibility of denying these filings. So I would personally recommend that we take a look at the land development code and really look at that together and how we can make changes to make these filings meet the requirements and requests and demands of our residents, as opposed to calling up every single filing when we really have no recourse to change them once they get to this point.
Councilmember Hurst.
I agree that it's the city's job, as well as the city council, to ensure that all new development is in compliance with the standards that we have. And again, that's why I advocate for making quality arguments to change the standards. No big deal to me. I will have that argument all day and enjoy that. I really think 10 years later, 12 years later, it may be time for us to look at new land development or making appropriate changes to our current land development code. But I've been on city council for almost 3 years, and I've talked to a ton of people as well. And I hear sometimes that they don't have a chance to speak. And then I educate them that, yes, you have several chances to speak in the process before it gets to development. And they're all posted, and not once have I found that we were out of compliance with law. And so the same 2 people, same group of 5 people, give or take, come to those meetings and they say their piece. But to suggest a city of 60,000 wants more opportunity to speak, I don't believe that, because we give ample opportunities to speak in the same group of 5, randomly, not always the same 5, but within the same handful of people, those are the ones that show up. So are we waiting to listen to those people, or are we really trying to hear the voice of, the 30,000 adults in Commerce City? That to me is provided by the ample opportunity for the public hearings on every step of the way, including zoning. And so for us to suggest here on council during meeting that we don't give a voice, I 100% disagree with that. We have ample opportunity to speak out against zoning way before any of this gets to this point. And so that's why my position is what it is. It's not that I don't want individuals to be able to be heard and speak. It's you can't wait until dirt starts moving to speak up. You have to speak up in the process as it goes.
Councilmember Noble.
What we're talking about here is transparency and access and visibility. There's a lot happening in Ward 4. That's where most of the development is occurring. There are impacts that the criteria speak to that we as city council people may recognize in a far different way, because we're on the ground, because we're driving the roads, because we're seeing the changes and the impacts, and we might evaluate the criteria in a different fashion. We might evaluate the criteria exactly as the staff has. But this is an opportunity for us to weigh in on the development that is burgeoning in the northeast corner of Commerce City. And I hope that you will vote for my motion as a courtesy. Thank you.
Councilmember Hurst.
I agree. And I think that's why we have to take a chance to go back and look at these criteria. We do see changes that are different than they were in 2009. But if we have specifics in how you're going to pass, they'd be met. If they're being met now, it doesn't mean they wouldn't be met if we changed them. But if we want to put details beyond what's in our land development code, we need to go back and make those changes and add those details. We can't just make our own determination and change the way that we see things. We are one city. We shouldn't have a different opinion than the city staff, because we direct the city staff on how to think, basically. And so if we want to put those details in there, ensure that those boxes are checked before approval, then that's our job to go back, change land development code, and get that particular, that specific in what it takes to be approved during an administrative process. And if we haven't done that, then that's our failure, not the developer's failure or the city staff's failure for approving something in that manner. It's because we haven't been detailed enough in our process for approval to pass.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, I'll go back to some similar comments that Councilmember Hurst has made related to updating the land development code. I would go so far as to make a motion this evening to create a citizen task force to review the land development code as related to subdivision filings. I think that is the best way to hear the voice of the residents and to make effective changes that we can implement, that we can see and see through the changes to the code that will make an impact to our community rather than calling up every filing. We're really not making progress that way. Let's dig into the details of the problem and put some residents to task to help us update that code.
Councilmember Douglas.
I really do believe that in this case, that people are, they're becoming aware of how quickly things are happening here in the north. And we must give our people the opportunity to weigh in, and that's why they don't, because they always say, no matter what I feel, or even if it's the majority, that there's nothing that can be done. And we're not going to change your minds anyway. And so they feel like they don't have a voice. This is an opportunity to give them that voice. And we have to start now. We cannot wait until we make changes to a land development code. We must honor our citizens.
Councilmember Noble.
That's a wonderful idea, Councilmember Grimes, and I do believe that our community development staff is doing exactly what you say, and they will be bringing some information before us soon in a study session, and we will be evaluating some of this. We will begin the evaluation, whether we need a task force, which might slow down the process and allow a heck of a lot more of these to go through before we have any changes. May not necessarily be the best path, but as soon as we hear from the community development staff, I think we'll have a better idea on that. Meantime, I do believe that taking the opportunity to vote on each of these plats is a good idea based upon the criteria, because we have a different view than others may have of whether and how these meet the criteria. We do have the future land use plan that called for a certain development on the corner, and we could evaluate that as well. I just think that we need this opportunity to look at each of these because of the generalized PUD, and to view the impacts that will occur against the criteria. Thank you.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't disagree with you, Councilmember Noble, but what I would rather see is and Councilmember Douglas, I'd rather give our residents a path that has teeth rather than bringing them to a public hearing where we realize if criteria are met, we have an obligation to approve filings. That, in my opinion, gives false hope to residents rather than a path where they can make a change. So again, I won't be supporting the motion, but I do want to see us make a change, just not in this way.
Any other discussion? Mr. Rogers?
Thank you, Mayor. And I want to say I appreciate the conversation that's being had around the table by our council. You're trying to come with some conscientious discussions and thoughts on how to continue sophisticating our land development process here at the city, so much appreciated. I think to just provide a little bit of clarification to Councilmember Noble's comment, yes, community development is looking at land development code changes with respect to some of our zone districts to tighten those up. I think it's worth a distinction about if the intent is to have require an enhanced review of approval criteria for a land use beyond the stage of zoning, your final subdivision from a practical standpoint isn't the best route. In the world of planning, a subdivision plat is a technical line drawing exercise that is an effectuation of a land use. It does not define, it does not limit, it does not support whether or not that land use can occur. It simply says it can fit on this piece of property, it has the proper access, and it has the proper ability to get connections there too from utilities. Now, there's always an associated land use application of a development plan, which you can look at strengthening possibly those approval criteria because it does take into account, is it in alignment with the comp plan? Is it in alignment with zoning? Is it in alignment with other practical criteria that have a reasonableness that can be further evaluated and being able to go through a process? So I think you have an opportunity, and as part of this process that community development is undergoing, to have it be looked at in that aspect, which is truly tied to, is this use permitted, not permitted, or does it have to go through a use by permit that can have other extenuating evaluation criteria to be brought forward or to be determined at the staff level. So just wanted to be able to provide you all with that distinction at the administrative level.
Councilmember Hurst.
Yeah, I'd also be interested in the future, some type of compromise, because I really think we're setting down a good path of discussion, trying to clarify, update, bring into current times. I'm all for that. One of the other things that I really think needs to be there is the history of the property. We don't own the land. Very, very, very rarely would we ever own land. So we don't know that within the land use development code and the zoning that we put on that property, that it wasn't on the market for 10 years as that type of development. And then they submitted, the landowner submits a request for a change in zoning or something, which now allows it to finally be sold. If we're not keeping track of all of that, you could want a restaurant being built there, all you want. But if it's been zoned and on the market for a restaurant land or restaurant development opportunity for the last 10 years, at some point, we've now hindered the owner's ability to make money off that property. And so we should hear the history of the property as part of these hearings or as part of when one of these gets administratively approved. I'm not opposed to it being part of the city manager's report to talk about, at least the high-level basics of each property, each plat. I mean, Councilwoman Noble made a good point. Last meeting that we discussed this. The last one we heard was like 2 months before that, or the last one that we got an email about it. So it's not like every single meeting Roger would have to go through, 15 different, plat approvals or anything like that. We can go over the one, we can go over why it met the major criteria, or we can even do less than that. I really think there's a way that we can communicate better and we can continue to educate when those opportunities are to voice an opinion. The thing about it is that what are the people that I talk to, our constituents, our voters, everybody, they don't necessarily see the entire big picture as well. And when you have the conversations and you show the entire big picture, a lot more understanding comes with that education. And again, I think part of this council's job, and I think we do a decent job at it, and we can continue to highlight the stuff that works, but it is educating on the process. We're not necessarily your normal city government. We don't own the firefighting or the fire department. We don't own our own water. There's a lot of educational opportunities in Commerce City that are different than even our next door neighbors, because we have a water district. And just look at your property tax and look at the line items on that. You could go through 2 weeks of training to understand what the difference is from each governing board, if you will. A lot of times I will hear a complaint that's not even city council's job at all. We have no say in it because some other elected board is making that vote. And so I think there's a compromise that makes sense. If everybody can agree upon it, we just have to get to that.
Councilmember Noble.
There are a couple of other things that we need to take a look at, and that is, as you pointed out, Councilmember Hurst, that things change over the course of a property. I know in one of these that we considered over the summer that there were more units approved than had been negotiated with 27J. So the moment you have more units, you have more students going into a school, there's a half-mile radius that 27J counts around a development, and that's how they decide if that makes sense, if they can support something. The moment that the city allows a change in density and increases the density, now you're putting pressure on the 27J schools, so that's a problem. The other is that we have laid on the table that we don't have a cost of city services per unit figure. So we do have a fiduciary responsibility as each of these comes forward. What exactly can the city afford as well? Because we provide city services for all of these. And in this particular case, we're looking at 154 residential lots in Settlers Crossing. So I think those are things that we need to, that we can consider as well that are impactful.
Councilmember Douglas.
So I don't think we can afford to pat ourselves on the back for doing such a phenomenal job of governing, because people are not happy. People are not happy in our community right now. They are very concerned about public education and how that is impacted by all of the development that's going on. They're extremely concerned about the metro districts and the HOAs, the high taxes. And I really feel that they just need to have an opportunity to weigh in at any point. This is their city. And so to have a public hearing so that they can weigh in is simply a public hearing. They still have an opportunity to weigh in until the 13th. I don't know what the repercussions would be, but we must know that right now things are moving really fast. And the citizens know that, they recognize that. And so we need to let them at least have their voices heard.
Councilmember Hurst.
But what are we going to do about it? If they're up here mad and everything in the development meets our 9 criteria, we have nothing to do about it. So it actually makes us look like the bad guy when we didn't take the appropriate steps to fix the land development code to fix the problem in the first place. And that's what we're advocating for, is let's go back and take a look and fix that. Because 27J has to approve every single development that we go through. It's part of the approval process. They're the ones that know if they can take on the services or not. If we have a 5% decrease in density or increase in density where we have more, like you're going from, you know, a townhome to an apartment complex and you have more potential students at that development, I fully agree. It needs to go back through a reassessment with 27J to understand if they can take on that additional density. Let's write that. Let's write a percentage increase into our land development code, and that triggers a process to get reapproved by not only 27J, but the rest of the city services that come with that, whether that's fire, whether that's water, all of the above. If you're increasing density and the needs of all the resources, then yeah, we should have a process, at least a percentage increase. If it's 5% higher, then maybe it has to go through a review again. But again, if you're saying that there's no opportunity for them to speak, but in the next sentence, you're saying they have the opportunity to speak till the 13th. I mean, then they have the opportunity to speak. They have the opportunity to write a 20-page letter to us and tell us why they think the impacts of 150 homes is negative to us and we shouldn't approve it. That sounds like a perfect opportunity. And so, to me, I'm more than willing to hear it. I just feel like we're wasting their time, because if we can't make any changes, we can't make any changes.
Councilmember Douglas.
That is not a waste of their time, and we chose to take these positions. It is not a job. We are public servants. And so, yeah, you got to take the good with the bad, and you got to hear from the people. So that goes with the territory. So whether it be in public hearing and that doesn't pass tonight for a public hearing, yes, they still do have the opportunity, but I'm telling you that the people appreciate being validated and recognized as having a voice and being able to weigh in on what their community looks like in the future.
Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? Is it on? Yeah. And I agree. I think it should be up to the residents to voice their opinion, and I don't agree. I don't believe in can't, because can't to me means won't. So I do think, anything is possible, and the residents should have the opportunity to voice their concerns as well, because like I said, to me, can't means won't. Thank you.
Councilmember Hurst.
I guess I just get the good phone calls and the good interactions, because when I'm in the community, for every one complaint, I hear at least 10 people say they love living here. And yeah, they call out high taxes, and they understand why you can't ask somebody who's lived in this southern side of the city 30 years to build roads and infrastructure up north that they'll never use in their life. So why would you ask them to pay? So yeah, they get it. Doesn't mean we can't get better. I'm not advocating that we don't get better and continue to make this place a better place to live. But to suggest that people don't like living in Commerce City is not the same people I talk to. People love our city. And again, I've been on council for almost 3 years. I've never heard one person ever ask for this to be brought up until recently, ever, not once. And as many times as we've had it, discussions about land use development, not once have I ever heard in a public setting people specifically talk about items that need to be improved so future development has this. We've talked about parks, we've talked about trails, that's all city stuff. We already have requirements. Enhancing those is not off the table. We talk about not having the funding to be able to cover city services. That's on us. That's not in these hearings. That's on us to fix our land development code, to fix our fees and our permit costs when we're building development. That's what this body is going to be doing over the next 2 years. We need to be doing that. We have probably full support of that, because there's nobody who doesn't agree that we have to pay for the services that are needed. And as our city grows, doubled in size basically in the last 15 years, we need to increase those fees to keep up. No big deal. That is a discussion that I think everybody's ready to have. But for us to suggest that a public hearing at this point in development will change anything without liability to the city for additional costs, court fees, and everything else, we don't have the expertise to redefine our 9 requirements and all of a sudden make something not approved because we don't feel that way.
Councilmember Noble.
Yes, I would, regarding notification of the public, what is the radius for the notifications for the letters that are sent out?
300 feet.
I'm sorry, did you answer, sir?
It's 300 feet.
It's 300 feet?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so in this particular one, there's no one who lives within 300 feet. But that doesn't mean it's not going to be impactful. I think that we are moving forward in several areas, which is great, as We heard community development is going to be bringing things forward to us. We have already discussed impact fees and increasing them, and that should be coming forward to us at some point, I would hope, sooner than later. We had discussed revisions to metro districts. We've been discussing that for 2 years, and in the interim, virtually every location in Northeast Commerce City has been metro districted without any reforms. So this will be my final comment. I don't want to drag this on because we have yet another one to discuss. So I will call the question. Oh, excuse me, unless the mayor would like to speak. I regret calling the question.
Any other discussion? I have some questions for Mr. Tolbert.
If we've called,
What's that?
did we call the question?
I believe that she.
No, I
rescinded that.
Okay,
take it back.
I'm sorry, thank you.
In this process, we get an email notifying us that this subdivision case is being considered through the administrative approval process. Part of that land development code allows the city council to formally vote to pull that up into a public hearing. Why? What is the purpose? I've heard my peers sit up here and say, there's nothing can be done, it's a waste of time, and that it's too late. So if all that is the case, why would there be a process in place to allow a council to pull it up? And if you're not the expert on that, I'll defer to either Mr. Rogers or Mr. Hayter to answer that question.
I think given my limited time, I would prefer that one of them maybe give you an answer. I've got an answer, but I think that they've got more experience with it in Commerce City than I do.
Mr. Rogers, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Yes, sir. So I would assign the ability for council and I would say, once again, this is another standard practice that is not just unique to Commerce City, but is broad spectrum when dealing with administrative items which allow for council or a resident to disagree with the technical delivery of information related to an administrative application. I say, so when you go to and I'm going to pick an example to help try to further communicate my suggestion on this matter. So when you look at approval criteria 3-D, the general layout of lots, roads, driveways, utilities, drainage facilities, and other services within proposed subdivision. What you will technically find and what you all don't see behind the scenes is a number of technical data that is submitted in support of their proposed layout that looks at the average daily trips, from making sure that the level of service that's being identified along that roadway is up to our municipal standards and the MUTCD, which is federal standards as it relates to the traffic. When we look at drainage facilities, we're also looking at very technical drainage reports to determine whether or not the both vertical and horizontal depth of that is able to meet the drainage outfall from that project. Now, what you will find is that while we have gone through that technical review and we have provided that analysis that we believe it has met those standards, that is not resolute in and of itself. It is still given an opportunity not just to council, but to residents to opine and to share their comments that they disagree with the technical analysis because it missed X, Y, and Z within that. Now,
Thank you. Can I stop you there?
yes, sir.
And thank you. That's a very in-depth answer and gets to the root of, I think, what we're discussing right now. The process allows for the council to hold a public hearing to determine whether or not they agree with the application of the technical standards, correct?
Yes, sir.
Correct. And so that brings up one of the approval criteria is we cannot have an adverse impact on the surrounding community. Is that correct? That is one of our 9?
Give me 1 second, sir. I'm looking for that exact language. The subdivision will not result in a substantial or undue adverse effect on adjacent properties, traffic conditions, parking, public improvements, either as they presently exist or as they may in the future exist as a result of the implementation of the provision and policies of the comprehensive plan, this land development code, or any other plan, program, or ordinance adopted by the city.
Okay, thank you. Undue adverse impact. Who determines whether or not there's an undue adverse impact?
Typically, that undue adverse impact is established by the referral body, if that is 27J, the South Adams South Adams County Water and Sand, the Fire District, our Public Works, and or in certain aspects, depending upon various performance standards, if the use is allowed, the Community Development Department.
Okay. Why are residents not included in the ability to speak out on whether or not it's an undue adverse impact on them?
I would say that they are. And the means by which they're allowed to do that is when this property is posted, they can file an objection as well. And as long as they are addressing the approval criteria, that could then also lead to a public hearing where they could then be heard and establish that record of an adverse impact. If it was missed in the planning process internally, if, you know.
Okay. I think what it comes down to is there is a set of standards that we heard that each case is applied to. Now, unfortunately, and I've got an inbox full of administrative subdivision cases here, and I can pull up all the different council communications. There is a very abbreviated table telling us whether or not it meets standards or does not meet standards. It doesn't go as in-depth as you just described in answering my question. So I think that makes it a little bit difficult to see where the technical aspect of each individual case falls. But there's a process in place, and as we heard, it's not a process that is unique to Commerce City. It is a process that is in place for municipalities to bring these cases for a public hearing, to allow residents, school districts, water districts, fire districts, and anybody else that may feel they have an adverse impact against them should those pieces of property be platted in that manner. We've had written communications submitted to us requesting these be called up. We've had a member of our community call in and speak during the meeting requesting they be called up. So why would we think that we should just wantonly disregard the request of community members to have a public hearing on this and determine whether or not all 9 of those standards are met? I personally think that is our duty as a council, especially after it has been requested by members of our community to do so. And it is part of our role, and that is part of the process that was established long before any of us ever considered running for council, minus one individual who was probably part of putting that process together. But that is what the process is. And the process, each time this email comes out, says, if you got any questions, contact us. If you want to, you have the ability to call this up and have public hearings on it. That is our role as a city council. We can go and we can talk about all the other stuff. We can talk about raising impact fees. Okay, great. There are council members sitting in here that objected to the idea of raising the drainage impact fee because it'll make future homeowners not be able to buy a house in Commerce City. So on one hand, we talk about, well, we can do all this, but whenever that comes to us from staff, we turn around and say, well, we don't like that idea because the negative implications that it's going to bring. We can't have it both ways. We either want to fix this holistically, or we want to pick and choose on which night it is and which thing we're discussing, where we're going to land on that position. But we can't flip-flop back and forth based on what we think it is and how we're going to try to argue a certain thing that is going forward. It's part of our process. There's a reason why the process exists. There's a request from community members, there's a request from council members. Therefore, I'm in favor of bringing this subdivision case forward. Councilmember Hurst.
So, if we took a poll, just guessing, I know I'm not true on this, but just bear with me. We took a poll on definition of adverse effects in the community. It'd be my guess that if we polled 25,000 adults in Commerce City, we would get about 16,000 different definitions, categorically different definitions. It's our job to define what adverse effects means, period. Because that's where the liability stands. We come in and we want to start implementing adverse effects and start denying development because our definition of adverse effects is changing based off of every single development. Incredible liability. And I've never heard anybody oppose any development fees, but I've heard plenty of times brought up the facts of raising costs on development is passed on. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, just means if someone's not saying it, then it's not being considered. We have to have those discussions. No matter what we're doing, no matter if it's comfortable to talk about or not. If you want to start with drainage, great, let's do a drainage increase. But then that's gonna, okay, well, we also need it here, 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 and here. Eventually, those costs do add up. One increase in costs may not have impact to the end homeowner's cost of the house, but a series of them definitely does. Always gonna bring up that concern because as we've always talked about, it's not just when we're in development phase like we are, we're in the growth phase like we are, we have to consider those that live here and those that will live here. We've talked about that over and over again. And so I just bring that up. I'm in full support of raising our development fees. Just have to have that conversation of the impacts of doing so.
Councilmember Noble.
One other question for you. So the radius is 300 feet for notification. At what point does the notification occur in the application process? Is it at the moment the application is received by the city for, in this example, 154 residential lots?
Thank you, Councilmember Noble. The notification of the 300-foot radius occurs at the time of posting of approval of the application. So typically a project is, when it comes through the door, it is referred out to the various, I would say, potentially impacted referral agencies, both internal and external to the organization. Once they have been able to make their determinations on having comments been adequately addressed, then an application is posted for approval. And once at that time of posting for approval, the notification map, which is created to identify those property owners within 300 feet, is created, and then a notification is sent out, allowing them to be able to raise any questions. Now, obviously, that's just the notification. We also do get questions from residents who are driving by the site, may be at an intersection, say, hey, I see that sign, what's on that sign? And we'll further delve into that, but that's typically the process.
When does that sign go up?
The sign for posting of approval occurs at the time that determination has been made by community development staff. Jim may be able to give a more exact step in which that is, but it's typically right before approval.
All right, so as was pointed out by earlier, if December 13th is a cutoff date, when did the sign go up?
Mr. Tolbert?
I believe they went out on Wednesday of last week, and then the notices were mailed on Friday, if I'm not mistaken. I can verify that and let council know.
Could someone tell me what he said? Unfortunately, Your mic on your computer is not very,
So
Good.
the signs went out Wednesday of last week for posting?
okay, so the public, so ostensibly, the public, which might have some interest in undue impacts or adverse impacts, as was pointed out by the mayor, doesn't have an opportunity even to weigh in until it's at the final plat stage, which is just last week. So I think that's what we're talking about here. This is an opportunity now, and now I will call the question.
I have a motion to call the question. Is there a second? Okay, motion fails.
I was just going to second it, I'm sorry.
All right, any other discussion? Councilmember Grimes?
Could we just restate the motion, please?
The motion is to call up the Settlers Crossing filing number 3 subdivision case for public hearing by the public, or by the Planning Commission and the City Council. Have a motion and a second, and seeing no other discussion, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Okay, I guess we're just going to count hands. All right, that is going to fail 4-4. All right, next up, we have similar case for reunion filing number 38, request for...
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, could I have the vote of the council members on that, by council member who voted no on this and who voted yes?
Voting in favor was Councilmember Douglas, Councilmember Noble, Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas, and Mayor Huseman. Voting no was Councilmember Hurst, Councilmember Grimes, Councilmember Ford, and Councilmember Davis.
Thank you.
Next up, we have this similar case for reunion filing number 38, request for approval of final plat. Mr. Tolbert, do you have anything to add on this? All right, Councilmember Noble, would you like to make a motion?
Yes, I move to call reunion filing number 38, final plat to create 153 residential lots and 11 tracts on approximately 21.9 acres for the property located at the southeast corner of 112th Avenue and Chambers, also zoned PUD for a city council hearing.
I have a motion to call up reunion filing plat number 38 for public hearings with the Planning Commission and the City Council. Is there a second? Mayor Pro Tem?
I'll second the motion.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 You can get a show of hands. I do believe we're going to fall on the same 4-4. Good to go, Mr. Gibson? Thank you. Next up, we have a presentation. It is the Environmental Planning Policy and Oil and Gas Monthly Update. Would like to invite Anita Riley, Principal Planner, to give the presentation.
Anita, you should be able to unmute yourself and start your video camera and start your presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. My name's Anita Riley. I'm a principal planner with Commerce City. And just for the record, I am not an environmental planner, but I am filling in while the city hires a new environmental planner. And I'm here to provide the monthly presentation for environmental planning and policy and oil and gas activities. Thank you. Could we go, yes, one more slide, please? Thank you. So the city has received 8 oil and gas permit applications in late 2019. 2 of those applications have since been withdrawn and 1 is incomplete. So that leaves us with 5 applications that are currently in development review. and no activity has occurred with these oil and gas permit applications this month. Could we go? Thank you. This slide shows the sites associated with the city's oil and gas permit applications. The sites with active applications are indicated in yellow, and those sites with applications that have been withdrawn are indicated in brown. The Colorado Oil and Gas Commission regulates oil and gas development in the state of Colorado. Two permit types issued by the state are Form 2 and Form 2A. Form 2A permit is required to construct or modify an oil and gas location or well pad, and a Form 2 permit is required for an oil and gas well, whether that is to drill a new well, deepen it, or some other activity. There are currently no active state Form 2 or Form 2A applications for sites within the city. The COGCC also regulates oil and gas development through spacing orders. Spacing orders are established to determine a minimum distance between wells and are intended to prevent over-drilling and protect the rights of mineral owners. They don't predict the placement of well sites, but do establish the spacing between future sites. This map shows spacing order activity within the city, and the sections with approved spacing orders are indicated in blue, while those sections with spacing orders that are under review are indicated in green. And there has been no activity with regards to pending orders in the past month. In March 2021, the city engaged Lotus Engineering and Sustainability to assist in the development of policies and guidelines related to environmental issues. A city organizational sustainability survey was conducted to identify the key components of a vision of sustainability for the city as an organization. This task is near its final stage with a draft recommendation that is currently under review. The Environmental Policy Advisory Committee, or EPAC, was formed to assist in the development of community-wide policies and strategies. There are 11 committee member positions and 1 alternate that have been allocated for this committee, and a new member was recently appointed on November 15th. That leaves 1 member position open. The meetings for EPAC have been paused while the environmental planning position is being filled, but resources are being regularly provided to EPAC members. Along with policy development, Lotus and their subcontractor Opinion Environmental are providing air and water quality monitoring services and technical expertise. And a draft air quality monitoring plan is currently being revised. And it will include comprehensive ideas for air quality monitoring around the city. The low impact development guidance is a part of the water quality policy deliverables and is currently in development. This slide shows the timeline for tasks associated with the environmental policy development. And I would note that the timeline has been adjusted to account for this search and hiring of a new planner with the October 31, 2022 expected completion date. Each month, information is gathered about the Suncor refinery regarding exceedances to state and federal emissions limits. Between the dates of October 22 and November 22, 9 incidents occurred, resulting in 18 exceedances. 3 exceedances were a result of a tripped fluid catalytic cracking unit, or FCCU, on October 26th. These were exceedances to opacity and carbon monoxide limits. An exceedance to carbon monoxide limits occurred on October 27th, and the case for this exceedance is under investigation. 2 exceedances to sulfur dioxide limits occurred on October 29th. The cause for these exceedances is also under investigation. An exceedance to carbon monoxide limits occurred on October 30th. The cause for this exceedance is under investigation. 4 exceedances occurred between November 2nd and 3rd due to a tripped FCCU and attempted restart. Limits exceeded were for opacity, carbon monoxide, flare gas hydrogen sulfide, and flare net heating value. An exceedance to carbon monoxide limits occurred on November 4th. The cause for this exceedance is under investigation. Intermittent exceedances to opacity limits occurred between November 8th and November 10th due to an attempted startup of an FCCU. Between November 15th and November 18th, there were intermittent exceedances to opacity limits due to the startup of an FCCU. This incident also resulted in intermittent exceedances to carbon monoxide limits between November 16th and November 18th. The startup of an FCCU, please, if we could go back one more, thank you. The startup of an FCCU also led to an exceedance of fuel gas hydrogen sulfide limits on November 19th and intermittent exceedances to flare gas hydrogen sulfide limits between November 18th and 19th. Thank you. So also each month, Suncor staff provides updates to recent activities at the Commerce City Refinery. The Community Air Monitoring Program provides air quality information to the public, and it includes information for several compounds, including carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, and volatile organic compounds. The first set of reports are available at ccnd-air.com. And the third quarter reports indicate that all measured compound concentrations were below acute health guidelines. Suncor thanks the City Council members who attended the familiarization tour to learn more about the program. Suncor also notes that they comply with reporting requirements, including those required by permits. Information is submitted to CDPHE on a monthly basis and includes the exceedance data that was reviewed on the previous slides. CDPHE is also in the process of renewing the water permit for Suncor and is taking public comment at this time. The permit regulates discharges of pollution to waters of the state. An exceedance related to the startup of an FCCU was noted in the exceedance summaries explained on previous slides. And for community investment, Suncor was recently recognized by the Adams 14 School District for work with this district, including support for a back-to-school event that provided clothing, backpacks, and school supplies for students, and an event that provided Thanksgiving baskets and will provide Christmas baskets for over 200 families. Next, thank you. Suncor also provided financial support for an Adams County Sheriff's Office charitable initiative and partnered with Kids First Healthcare to offer a $5,000 match challenge for Colorado Gives Day. And that concludes this presentation, and I am available for questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate the information in the presentation. Are there any questions from council? Councilmember Noble?
I didn't see on the map the antelope pad. Has the antelope pad been pulled also?
It was withdrawn.
Withdrawn. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you again for the presentation, for your time this evening, especially not being your specialty. I greatly appreciate you giving that to us. I do have a question, Mr. Tinklenberg. How long has the city been without an environmental planner?
Mr. Rogers?
Thank you for the question, Mayor. We've been without a environmental planner, I would say October 15th, sir.
And where are we in the process of replacing that position?
We are currently in the recruitment process. I think we all can share that we are experiencing recruitment challenges in a very tight and tough market, particularly in a very highly specialized field as the one that we are searching for. So we're making sure that we have the right candidate coming in, but it's currently on the street, and we are soliciting applications for that position.
And when did recruitment begin for that position?
Recruitment, I believe, began in earnest October 18th.
And when did Mr. Martinelli notify his supervisors that he intended on leaving the city?
He notified supervisors, not exact dates, but I would say the first week of October, so September 29th, 30th, October 1st, 2nd, somewhere in around there.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any other questions on this presentation? Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda includes items that are routine, procedural, informational, self-explanatory, and non-controversial. They are presented to council for a single motion and vote. Any member of council may ask to remove a specific item for further discussion and a separate vote. Tonight, there are 13 items listed under the consent agenda. Does anyone on council wish to remove an item off the consent agenda for further discussion? Councilmember Noble.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to pull the minutes of November 15th. There is a typo. The maker of the motion is also shown as a seconder. And I would like to pull Resolution 2021-109.
Okay, we're pulling minutes of the 15th and resolution 2021 dash.
Just for the record, there were 2 minutes from November 15th? The special meeting and the regular meeting?
The regular meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, looking for a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as modified. Mayor Pro Tem.
So moved.
Councilmember Hurst.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as modified, which is removing the regular council meeting minutes of November 15th and resolution 2021-109. Mr. Gibson, will you please read the titles and take a roll call vote?
Minutes of the October 4th, 2021 regular meeting. Minutes of the October 11th, 2021 special meeting. Minutes of the October 18th, 2021 regular meeting. Minutes of the October 25th, 2021 special meeting. Minutes of the November 1st, 2021 regular meeting. Minutes of the November 15th, 2021 special meeting. Minutes of the November 29th, 2021 special meeting. Minutes of the November 29th, 2021 organizational meeting. Resolution 2021-99, a resolution authorizing award of contract for Buffalo Run Golf Course irrigation system replacement contract to Lexicon Incorporated. Resolution 2021-105, a resolution approving economic development business incentives for Performance Food Group. Resolution 2021-111, a resolution appointing members to designated boards and commissions of Commerce City. Councilmember Madera, Councilmember Davis.
Councilmember Davis, this is a roll call vote. We need your affirmative or negative.
Councilmember Noel,
Aye.
Councilmember Hurst,
Yes.
Councilmember Grimes,
Yes.
Councilmember Ford, Councilmember Douglas,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas,
Yes.
Mayor Huseman.
Yes.
Passes unanimously with one excused absence.
Thank you, sir. All right, we'll go to the meeting minutes first. Councilmember Noble?
Yes, thank you. This is an award for $1.6 million. And it was my understanding that over a certain limit, they come before the city council, that they're not consent agenda items, that we actually discuss them.
Let me interrupt you for a second. We're doing the meeting minutes first.
Oh, the minutes have a typo. Sorry. See what item it was. Oh, I know. It was under administrative council business. It reads motion made by Councilmember Jennifer Allen Thomas, seconded by Councilmember Jennifer Allen Thomas.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Noble.
Mr. Gibson, do you know who the appropriate seconder should be?
We have the recording, and we will find that out and get that corrected.
All right, so you'll bring that back to us at a future date?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. All right, now on to the city's janitorial services contract. Councilmember Noble.
Yes, thank you. Again, it was my understanding that when an item is over a certain amount, that it comes before city council for discussion. It is not on the consent calendar. In addition, this is janitorial services. Have we always had a service contract for janitorial services, or have we had janitors on staff?
We have public works staff here available to speak to more details on the contract and our custodial services.
While he's coming up to the microphone, I can answer the general question first. At one time, we had staff members who were cleaning the buildings, basically. And several years back, we went to contracting that service due to difficulty with recruiting people and also due to performance issues that we found with that. So at this point, I will turn it over to Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, sir. As a follow-on to the city manager, David Bebeck and I, who have just recently taken on this responsibility, we went back in the records to about 2010, and that has, through that period of time, it's always been a contracted service by the city. We had put it on our to-do list for the next cycle to investigate the possibility of doing it in-house, to do a cost-benefit analysis, to take it on in-house versus do it by contract. But we did not do that during this cycle. And based my understanding with respect to resolution versus ordinance and council level of approval, my understanding is there isn't a stipulation that precludes this from being part of the consent agenda item. It does require a resolution and therefore getting council's approval for the scope and the magnitude of the work, and that falls within the purview of the ordinance provisions. Pardon me, the resolution provisions.
Was this in the budget that we approved, or is this an additional item as well?
Now, this, the actual funding for this is part of the budget, has been during my tenure and dating back to 2010. The amount that was approved in the budget was equivalent to the amount that we expensed last year for the budget. There has been roughly a $10,000, a 10% increase. So we would likely, in the next reappropriation in 2022, have to seek the additional funds. But when we were going through the 2022 budget deliberations, since we did not have a good sense as to what the bids we would receive, the decision was made not to up the amount of the budget to the custodial contract until we actually received the bids and picked a vendor.
Is this in addition? Is the $1.6 million in addition to what we approved in the budget?
No, ma'am. The base contract for the recommended vendor is about $523,000 a year. What we budgeted for and was in the previous contract was roughly $472,000 a year. So that $472,000 a year equivalent was what we initially budgeted for this program. So we would have to seek roughly a $50,000 increase for this year's budget to cover the total anticipated cost for the custodial contract.
Thank you.
Councilmember Douglas.
Thank you for that information. So if this contract is not approved by council, then we have no janitorial services available?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay,
We
and
do have the capability of extending the existing contract, but there would be an incremental increase to that price. There was a 3-year base contract with the potential to renew that for 2 one-year terms. So we do have the capability to do that, but the cost, we would have to negotiate with them for what the additional cost would be for the subsequent years of service.
and during the next 3 years, we will be looking at doing this in-house and providing jobs for people who are looking for work like that, especially for community members. Would that be
ma'am.
the case?
Yes, ma'am. On our agenda is to investigate the cost benefit of doing this in-house versus via a third-party contractor. For example, this year, we received 8 bids, but none of them were from Commerce City, centric city, employers. So one thing we try to do is encourage Commerce City employers to seek out business with us and offer an incentive based on how we evaluate that program. But none of the 8 vendors were businesses that call Commerce City home.
So maybe you misunderstood my question. It was actually that we are not going to look at continuing to outsource this, but to actually provide people jobs
Yeah.
with the city.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I apologize. I
That's
probably
all right.
glanced over that part of the question. We will be doing an assessment of that to evaluate whether it makes more sense for the city from a dollar standpoint and a policy standpoint to do this type of work in-house versus contract. And we will take that analysis to the city manager's office for evaluation, who would then in turn will share it with council.
And I would hope that those would be good-paying jobs with livable wages so that it would encourage people to want to take that kind of job. I know a lot of times when things are contracted out to private contractors, the money usually stays at the top in the administration portion of the business and doesn't usually get filtered down to the people who actually do the work. And that's one of my concerns about outsourcing work, because we don't have any oversight as to how the money is spent in that contract. So I would definitely encourage not putting this on the back burner for the next 3 years, but to make sure that that becomes a priority. So I would really appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am, understood.
Are there any other questions? I have a couple questions. When was the RFP issued for this?
I believe it was a couple months ago, but I don't remember the exact date. I apologize for not knowing that. David, do you happen to know the answer to that question? October.
So this runs into an issue that you said that now money is going to have to be reappropriated because the contract is going to cost more than what was initially budgeted. And we seem to have these contracts that always kick over about the first of the year. Why are we not putting the RFPs on the street earlier in the year so that accurate budget information can be presented to the city council for a vote?
At the time, we did not have the staffing or the resources to do that work with respect to other priorities we had in the organization. We did have, the contract will be expiring and it'll be effective this year, so I'm not trying to offer an excuse, I'm just giving you a reason as to why it didn't happen sooner. During the budget process, we did discuss the possibility of increasing that with the expectation that the price would go up, but since we did not have a firm bid at that time, we weren't in a position to give an accurate number, so it was decided it would be best to use the existing number and then do a reappropriation if and/or as necessary.
And so if the council doesn't approve this, then there's no custodial services effective January 1st.
The contract currently expires January 1st. The contract could be extended. As I mentioned, we could continue it for another year if we would prefer to do that. I would mention our evaluation ended up with us selecting the contractor who's currently in place. It was a determination made that they were the best value to continue to provide that service. So if we extend the existing contractor, it will end up being with the same provider that we're recommending to council.
Okay. In the legislative text and in council communication, it says that of these 8 individuals that applied for this contract, they were evaluated on 5 different categories. Why wasn't the scorecard included in either of those documents so that the council could see that?
I have the scorecard handy here, and I'd be most happy to share it with the council if they would like to see the details of that. There was 10 categories that were evaluated. We listed, I think, included 7 in that summary. It was based on a 150-point total score, and that score was divided with 30 points amongst 5 panelists who evaluated those criteria. And if you would bear with me for a moment, I'd be most happy to share those results with you.
I appreciate that, but that doesn't answer the question of why it wasn't just included in the documentation sent out to council for this resolution.
When we were discussing that criteria, we didn't know whether or not it would be the most prudent to do that unless and until the council asked for those details. We didn't necessarily want to share the particulars of any particular vendor's proposal on the event that we may indirectly speak ill of them in terms of the proposal that they made or the values that we evaluated on the different criteria that they provided, as well as the price points that they gave on that. But I have that information handy, and I'm most happy to share it.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other questions. Any other questions? Councilmember Douglas?
Yes, thank you. So I also noted that in addition to the annual charges, fees, whatever you would like to call them, that they had also the ability to have an additional $15,000 added to their contract for work as was deemed suitable. How is that overseen? Do they come to you and say, this is what needs to be done, this is how much it costs? What's the oversight on that?
Yes, generally speaking, that is work that's initiated by us, which is extra add-on special work that may need to be done. There is an occasion where they may identify that work, but under either case, we directly write that scope of work and that we manage the oversight of that. David and his coordinator, his fleet facilities coordinator, would principally be involved with doing the oversight on that, as well as the facility engineers for the relative facilities that they're servicing.
Thank you.
Yes, and that has been a historical part of the contract to give that flexibility if there's any special needs that need to be met that fall outside the basic requirements of the contract.
Thank you. I just needed clarity, and you provided that.
Any other questions? Councilmember Grimes?
Thank you, Mayor. So if we extend for the next year but don't approve this particular RFP, is a year a suitable amount of time to evaluate the cost benefit of hiring these services internally?
I think that would give us a reasonable amount of time to make a determination, at least to investigate and provide recommendations to leadership and council.
And if you determined the cost benefit is not there to do this internally, we could go back out to bid next year?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay, and then just a general question, not specifically to you, but is it customary when you don't have a good cost estimate for budget to add a contingency?
Yes, ma'am. We have a contingency account that lives in the finance department, and it requires approval by the director of finance and the city manager in order to be used.
But not necessarily on a project-by-project basis, on an AFE.
On our capital projects, we include a contingency amount, and it'll vary by the type of project. But on an operational issue like this, we use the contingency account that lives in finance.
So essentially, we'd be authorizing use of contingency funds if we did approve this?
If we approve this and it requires the additional $50,000 with the potential for 15, yes, that is true.
And that's already built into the approved budget?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
This time, are there any other questions? Looking for a motion and a second to approve Resolution 2021-109. Councilmember Hurst.
So moved.
Councilmember Ford. What's that?
Second the motion.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second to approve Resolution 2021-109. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd actually like to see this go to an extension for a year and do cost-benefit analysis. And if we need to go to RFP next year, I think that is appropriate, but I'd like to see what we can do ahead of that.
Councilmember Hurst.
My one concern is recruiting. And really, even if we're cheaper, can we find the people, the expanse of a staff that you would need to appropriately clean all the buildings? You know, they can't be just here. They're going to have to be at all the several locations. And so you're going to need a staff, not just a couple custodians, probably a supervisor, and so on and so forth. And of course, we do have some of that built into our system now. But because we've been doing this for at least 11 years, our system is set up that way. So I'm not saying I don't trust you, but I think a year to establish cost is maybe appropriate, but to be able to flip that switch and start doing that is probably not realistic at the end of a 1-year time frame to be able to recruit and get a staff on board. So I just see this, no matter if we extend it a year, it's going to end up being 2 to 3 years before we can actively take on this role ourselves. My personal opinion, I wasn't managing as many buildings in the past, but hiring a custodial staff was always incredibly hard for me in the past.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Hurst, I don't disagree with you. I think it's a lofty goal to implement a custodial staff in a year, but with the option to go to RFP, I don't see any downside to attempting it, and I'd like to see us set that goal and try to bring it in-house. And I think there's a lot of people in our community who may want that job. It just may take more recruiting efforts to get them in-house. So I don't disagree with you, but I'd like to see us try that route.
Councilmember Noble.
Councilmember Grimes, would you request that as an amendment? If you do, I would support it.
Yeah, I would request it as an amendment.
I'll second that.
I didn't catch the motion. Can you let me know what that motion was?
I'd like to motion to extend the contract for 1 year with the option to go to RFP at the end of the year.
I don't think an amendment there is the appropriate thing at this time. I think we'll have to vote on this first motion and see how that goes. And then after that, if need be, you can make a motion at that time.
Fair enough, thank you.
Mr. Rogers?
Thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to share for council as you all are trying to make an informed decision. I think we're all making the assumption that while we have the vendor already in-house working for us with custodial services, that they'll be willing to negotiate an extension. And we haven't asked that question quite frankly, directly to them if they're willing to negotiate that. And I'd be concerned that with whatever action's taken tonight and we come back and we don't have that as an option, now we're scrambling at the end of the year for January. So I just put that forward to make sure that there's clarity, unless Joe's just received some different information, but I just want that on the table for your consideration and fact.
I'll get to you in a moment, Councilmember Grimes, and then Councilmember Hurst. Here's where my frustration now comes in. It's December 6th. The contract expires December 31st, and once again, the City Council is put in a position, either vote in favor of this or we don't have custodial. Mr. Rogers?
If I may, sir, we still have the December 20th regular meeting. I do believe we are still scheduled to have that. We can reach back out to the vendor and initiate this conversation so that we can come back to you with that additional information, and in particular, maybe some basic terms and conditions of what that might look like so that you all can then be able to take action.
Councilmember Grimes?
That was going to be my request. Thank you.
Councilmember Hurst?
I just wanted to say they're probably going to come back and say, yeah, we want what we just put in that RFP. You know, if you're negotiating, they already did all the work to talk about the cost for 2022 and it's going to be for them. So I think we might know what it's going to be. It's just going to be 1 year of that 3-year term.
Councilmember Douglas?
Don't we owe it to the public to get that information and make a better decision at that point? We have the time. Well, why make the assumption that what it's going to be is going to be what you think it's going to be?
That was a tongue twister. All right, have a motion and a second to approve Resolution 2021-109. Mr. Gibson, will you please read the, you have to read the title on that?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Resolution 2021-109, a resolution authorizing award of contract for citywide custodial services to Town and Country Development Corporation.
And we will do a roll call vote on that.
Yes, sir. Councilmember Davis? Councilmember Noble?
No.
Councilmember Hurst?
I should have saved you guys time and rescinded. No.
Was that an aye or an A? Thank you. Councilmember Grimes?
No.
Councilmember Ford?
No.
Councilmember Douglas?
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas?
No.
Mayor Huesman?
No.
Motion fails
7 to 1.
with one excused absence.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Grimes, you have a motion to make?
I do. Thank you. I would like to motion that we, well, I'm actually not quite sure how to make this motion now. If we're just going to send staff back to request more information, is it prudent to make that motion this evening?
I would say that given the lack of information that we have, we would not want to set forth our final plan on what we want to do, that we would direct staff to go re-engage with the existing contractor to seek out a 1-year extension and bring back to council pricing on that 1-year extension for approval.
And that needs to be made in motion form. Then I will say, so moved.
Have a motion to direct staff to go out and negotiate a 1-year extension and bring that back for council for approval. Is there a second? Councilmember Noble?
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second to direct staff to go out and negotiate a 1-year extension of the janitorial services contract for the City of Commerce City and bring back to council at the December 20th meeting for approval. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Hurst.
Apologize for making you vote on the first one. I agree with the arguments made.
Seeing no other requests for discussion, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries 8-0 with 1 absence. All right, we're going to move on to resolutions. We have Resolution 2021-107, North Metro Youth Diversion Appointment. Would like to invite Roger Tinklenberg, City Manager, to introduce the topic.
Historically, we have had either the judge or the court administrator serve on this board. And given the fact that the judge is retiring and our court administrator is performing very well, the proposal is to appoint her to the board. And because of turnover in staff that we have experienced, we wanted to maintain the flexibility to be able to make a replacement appointment if that were ever necessary on a fairly quick basis. So that's the rationale for delegating that authority to me to make that appointment. But my intention is to appoint the court administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Tinklenberg. Are there any questions from council to staff? Seeing none, I'm looking for a motion and a second to approve Resolution 2021-107. Councilmember Hurst.
So moved.
Councilmember Grimes.
Second the motion.
I have a motion and a second to approve Resolution 2021-107. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, Mr. Gibson, would you please read the title?
Resolution 2021-107, a resolution granting authority to appoint a city employee to the North Metro Youth Diversion Programs governing North Metro Community Diversion Board.
Thanks, sir. And we have a motion and a second to approve that resolution. We'll do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries unanimously, 8-0, with one absence. Next up, we have ordinances on first reading. Ordinance 2362, the 2022 budget reappropriation. I'd like to invite Roger Tinklenberg, City Manager, to introduce the topic.
Our typical process is to gather up all of the items that were carried over into the following year due to projects just not getting finished in a particular fiscal year. And typically that happens in the May to June timeframe. What makes it different this year is that we have a number of projects that were stalled due to supply chain issues. And as a result, projects that were initiated have not been able to be completed. And rather than have contracts be terminated by the company, we need your authorization to carry that money over so that we do not risk losing those contracts and seeing a price increase instead. Therefore, a number of projects, and I use the projects in a generic sense, not in terms of capital projects, which are different. These particular items were not able to be finished in a timely manner due to the issues that I mentioned, and therefore we're requesting authorization to carry over this 600 and some thousand, I forget the number right off the top of my head, but to finish out these items that were contracted but not completed in this fiscal year.
Thank you, Mr. Tinklenberg. Does anyone on council have any questions for staff? Seeing none, I'm looking for a motion and a second to introduce by council as seated and approve on first reading ordinance 2362. Councilmember Grimes.
So moved.
I have a motion to introduce by council as seated and approve on first reading ordinance 2362. Councilmember Hurst. I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, Mr. Gibson, would you please read the title and take a roll call vote?
Ordinance 2362, an ordinance amending the 2022 budget of the City of Commerce City, Colorado by appropriating portions of the unencumbered fund balances of the General Fund, Facilities Fund, and the Information Technology Fund, and reaffirming certain prior appropriations for a total amount of $660,500 and authorizing the expenditure thereof. Councilmember Madera, Councilmember Davis. Aye. Councilmember Noble.
Aye.
Councilmember Hurst.
Yes.
Councilmember Grimes.
Yes.
Councilmember Ford. Yes. Councilmember Douglas.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Allen Thomas.
Yes.
Mayor Huseman.
Yes.
Passes unanimously, 8-0 with one excused absence.
Thanks, sir. We'll move on to ordinance 2363, which is an emergency ordinance authorized leasing agreement. Does anybody on council have any questions for staff? Seeing none, I'm looking for a motion and a second to introduce by council as seated and approve as an emergency ordinance 2363. Council Mayor Pro Tem,
So moved.
Councilmember Hurst.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to introduce by council as seated and approve as an emergency ordinance, ordinance number 2363. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, do you want to remind, because this is a emergency ordinance, it will require 7 affirmative votes to pass. Mr. Gibson, will you please read the title and take a roll call vote?
Ordinance 2363, an emergency ordinance authorizing the leasing of certain equipment and the execution and delivery of the city of a lease purchase agreement and other financing documents in connection therewith, setting forth parameters and restrictions with respect to the financing, ratifying action previously taken concerning the referenced transactions, and providing other matters relating thereto, and declaring an emergency. Councilmember Madera, Councilmember Davis, Councilmember Noble,
Aye.
Councilmember Hurst,
Yes.
Councilmember Grimes,
Yes.
Councilmember Ford, Councilmember Douglas,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas,
Yes.
Mayor Huseman.
Yes.
Passes unanimously with one excused absence.
Thank you. We'll move on to ordinances on second reading. This is ordinance 2358, increase the total expenditure amount for leasing of vehicles. This ordinance was not approved unanimously on first reading and was therefore not placed on the consent agenda for second reading. This time I'm looking for a motion and a second to approve on second and final reading ordinance 2358. Councilmember Hurst.
So moved.
Have a motion. Councilmember Grimes.
I'll second the motion.
Have a motion and a second to approve on second and final reading ordinance 2358. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, will the clerk please read the title and take a roll call vote?
Ordinance 2358, an ordinance amending ordinance number 2143 to increase the authorized total expenditure amount for the leasing of vehicles under the city's master lease program agreement with Enterprise Fleet Management. Councilmember Madera, Councilmember Davis, Councilmember Noble,
Yes.
Councilmember Hurst,
Yes.
Councilmember Grimes,
Yes.
Councilmember Ford, Councilmember Douglas,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas,
Yes.
Mayor Huseman.
Yes.
Passes unanimously with one excused absence.
Thanks, sir. We'll now move on to administrative council business per council policy. Except for emergency or unforeseen items, council members are encouraged to submit administrative business items by the Tuesday before the meeting with another council member's endorsement. Are there any members of the council that have administrative business items of an emergency or unforeseen circumstance? Councilmember Grimes.
I'd like to request that we grant an extension on the Oakwood Development Plan, and I think that Mr. Rogers has some updates related to that. To do such, we would need to have a special meeting next week, and I just wanted to take this opportunity to have a short discussion about that.
So you have motioned to extend the consolidated development agreement for Oakwood Homes?
Yes.
Is there a second? Mr. Davis? Councilmember Davis? Thank you. I have a motion and a second to extend the consolidated development agreement for Oakwood Homes. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Hurst?
Can we get clarification, I guess, on the motion? I think there's a couple pieces to this that I don't want to get mixed together. We're not talking about the TIF agreement. We're not talking about not making changes. But we heard that there's repercussions of not doing that. And so I'd like to hear the details, if possible, from Roger or Jason as to the discussions that are being had. You know, what are those? Remind us of the implications, because I think this new council, kind of deserves to hear that, because this is obviously an ongoing, pressing issue, and let's get some clarification as to steps forward, so we're not muddying up the water, if you will.
Just a point of clarification, I think you want the motion to state that you're requesting a special meeting to consider extension, not approving extension at this time, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Mr. Rogers, you want to provide a little more detail on what we're looking at?
Thank you, Roger. So in follow-on to the conversation that was held with the previous council on October 25th, at that time, the discussion was to allow for the expiration of the Consolidated Development Agreement and for staff to undertake a new effort of developing terms and conditions for a new Consolidated Development Agreement that would have additional mechanisms and standards to effectively deliver the intended land uses and key infrastructure, which would also look at the capital structure of how those projects would be funded back to the key infrastructure. Since that date, staff has begun those conversations and developing those key terms and conditions. But what we've come to also understand is that the Consolidated Development Agreement provided, I would say, a mechanism or a way for existing applications to be able to move through our process, and we have a number of plat applications, that are currently within our process, and an extension or a new agreement that is not in place. We would then be required to go through individual agreements that then could lead to disjointed development and or delivery of various infrastructure that may not be reliant on that TIF agreement that we have, or that sales and use tax agreement. So there becomes a complexity in and around the entitlements and the delivery of certain infrastructure based on those entitlements. Similarly, at the same time, the Consolidation Development Agreement also includes prior agreements, and there are a number of prior agreements that are referenced within that, from annexation agreements, which have also outlined terms and conditions for reunion, or at the time, the Buffalo Hills Ranch PUD, for annexation into Commerce City, once again, getting back into delivery of disjointed development and or key infrastructure tied within those agreements. What we are proposing, or would like to propose, if this is a consideration for council, is once again going back to the October 25th meeting. We understand and heard the concerns and the interests of the council tied to matters around vested property rights, around subdivision exemptions, statutory districts, impact fees, and sales and use tax as it relates or was woven throughout that document, would be to extract those items, move forward with a amended and restated extension of the existing terms and conditions that allow for a comprehensive and coordinated development, key infrastructure, for a period of 6 months. And knowing within that 6 months, staff's goal, as we've already started, is to negotiate those terms and conditions with reunion, knowing that, once again, we're being able to keep at the baseline development moving forward in a structured and a coordinated fashion with what we know will be infrastructure associated from roadways, drainage, and the like.
Councilmember Noble.
So, Mr. Rogers, are you saying that the portion of the agreement that gives the Reunion Master Developer Oakwood Homes 1% of 3% would continue for 6 months, or would continue for the 10 years that they requested?
No, ma'am. For the 6 months, that would be removed. That would not be on the table for this 6-month extension. The projects that are within our process are not reliant upon that tax structure or that capital structure. So we would not include that or other provisions that are tied within that sales and use tax agreement, or make reference to that agreement forward for this 180 days, while we, with Reunion, negotiate new terms and conditions that would be a more longer standing agreement after that, in which we would bring to council for, once again, negotiating position and response throughout that process.
Well, I'm all in favor of the initiatives that you're taking, Mr. Rogers. With Oakwood, I think that sounds like the most prudent way to handle this at this time. Thank you.
Any other questions, discussion? Okay, I have a motion and a second calling for a special meeting to have a discussion over the consolidated developer agreement for Oakwood Homes and reunion development. We'll do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed say nay. Let's get a voice or a count of hands. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All right.
Can I get clarity? I'm sorry, I am new. I need clarity on what we're voting on. I don't know what we're voting on. How can I vote when I don't know what it is?
We have a motion and a second to call for a special meeting to discuss extending the consolidated development agreement for Oakwood Homes for the reunion.
Okay, thank you.
All those in favor, please again raise your hands. And the ayes are Councilmembers Hurst, Councilmember Grimes, Councilmember Ford, and Councilmember Davis. The nays are Councilmember Douglas, Councilmember Noble, Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas, and the mayor. Motion fails. Is there any other administrative council business? Councilmember Hurst.
I'd like to make a motion to have that discussion now then.
I have a motion to have discussion now. Councilmember Grimes.
I'll second the motion.
I have a motion and a second to have that discussion now. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Hurst.
What are the impacts of not having an extension? With removing all that we have.
Your question is not in relation to whether we have the discussion right now. You're asking to actually have the question on the issue. So do you have a discussion matter on?
We just had an open discussion on the last topic and it didn't have to do with it.
Mr. Ader?
I would agree with your ruling, Mr. Mayor.
Well, okay, so I'll restate my question then, because we just talked about, we just had an open discussion that led to us deciding not to hold this special meeting. So let's get the facts as to should we have this discussion right now or not.
Okay, go ahead.
My question still stands.
So the implications, and I'm going to try to step through this in a succinct manner. So, Roger, toss something at me if I start to get long-winded. The implications are multifaceted. We have, once again, a number of different entitlement applications, and now I don't have exact examples of it, but in those entitlement applications, based on various filings, there are the delivery of certain infrastructure tied to those filings. Some of those filings may be leading towards the dedication of drainage for the development that may also be able to help in the larger picture of drainage for that basin. There may be other infrastructure that's delivered with respect to roadway improvements that allow for connections to be made, being able to fill gaps in sidewalks. So at a minimum, we have, once again, right now, a minimum of 8 entitlement applications that are being currently processed through the city. If you take those examples, once again, the delivery of those entitlement applications have been tied to the existing consolidated development agreement that allows for the coordinated delivery of that infrastructure with that build out. So what you start to find if you do not have that coordinated effort and have to go with individual agreements, those individual agreements may not take into account a timing mechanism for how those are actually delivered into the community. And what you may lead into is what we call in the business a gap tooth smile. you'll have a section of a roadway that's built, and then you may not have another section because the developer may choose to want to move through with a different section because of the timing of various improvements and or, once again, the market may be driving for that to occur. Whereas this gives us a little bit more of an ability to help influence and to ensure that we're getting that entire spine, whether it's pedestrian, whether it's transportation, and or storm for drainage, to being able to benefit the community. Now, for a master plan community of this size, it is not atypical to have a consolidated development agreement in place and work through extensions so that, once again, you are ensuring that timely coordinated development and making sure that the improvements that are being delivered can be delivered in a fashion and a timeline that exerts maximum leverage within the community for that benefit. So come December 18th, as we know, the December 17th is the final date. For those 8 applications, those processes would have to be pulled back, and we would then, from that point, have to enter into specific one-on-one negotiations on the timing or cash in lieu of, because there is also the opportunity to offer cash in lieu of and not construct those improvements, and that those could potentially become the responsibility of the city. So this consolidated development agreement also serves as an ability to continue the conversation in good faith with what we've already started with when these applications were submitted on file, subject to that CDA, to ensure that those improvements are delivered. Now, once again, this has no impact or bearing on the 1% of the 3%. That is not a part of this conversation. That's not a part of this discussion. That is off the table for us at this point in time until we've been able to negotiate a new capital structure in which you all as a body are supportive of and being able to bring back forward to reunion and obviously for your adoption and consideration. What we're simply talking about here are the development mechanisms for ensuring land use and key infrastructure is delivered. Not the financing, not the structure, not the remittance of impact fees, not the establishment of a credit for road impact fees that are paid back to the developer for construction. Right. Once again, the Land Development Code in its essence will be a requirement for them to continue to move forward outside of what is some of these aspects on streets, crossings, reimbursable agreements for, which is appropriate for delivering improvements that are above and beyond what is required of them that other properties are going to be able to leverage for their own development. They are making some of those improvements as part of their development that other developers will be able to benefit from. And without that reimbursement agreement for those improvements, then some of those key improvements, in this case, I can share this example, is a drainage basin would not be able to be constructed that has a benefit both upstream and downstream to our community. So there is, I would say, validity to the extension request from a staff perspective. We are looking at a 6-month extension, potentially, once again, to give us enough room for comfort of being able to negotiate due diligently on behalf of the city and based off of what we've heard from council and continue to get direction from council with Oakwood. That is once again, enhanced document that has those mechanisms that accomplish your goals for fiscal sustainability around the capital structure and also looking at the delivery of land uses that are indicative of the intent of the PUD and how that we hold them to that.
Councilmember Noble.
Mr. Rogers, is Oakwood Homes on board with this 6-month extension?
Oakwood Homes is on board with the 6-month extension. We didn't want to be too presumptive. We've had light conversations with them with respect to the sales and use tax, and I would like to say that they are also on board with that not being included in our agreement. And we would provide them with a new amended and restated agreement to get their principled agreement, that then when it comes back to you, if this is to move forward on the 13th, that you would have that confirmation as well. But we have had conversations around that, and I would like to think that we are also in agreement that that is not on the table today.
So in theory, that should give comfort to people who might be more representative of development interests, for example, to know that Oakwood Homes appears to be comfortable with this 6-month extension.
Yes, ma'am. With redaction of certain sections of the existing agreement and only carrying forward key articles or sections that allow for that coordinated effort.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Grimes.
I just want to clarify with Councilmember Noble that we're asking for the same thing, the extension, not to approve the existing development agreement, but to approve an extension of 6 months. That's what I'm asking for.
The 6 months based upon
Yes.
the negotiations that the staff is doing is what I said I supported earlier, that I thought was prudent.
And I agree with you.
Good.
That's what I'm asking for, and
Yep.
that's what we would like to have a special meeting about to approve.
But we already voted against a special meeting.
Right, so how do we move forward with an extension if we don't have an opportunity to,
We have a meeting on December 20th.
and it will have already expired?
No, it expires December 31st.
The agreement expires December 17th, ma'am.
My apologies. Mr. Rogers, are you saying that we need to have a vote on this extension, or do you just go forward with it? I'm unclear. If you don't need our vote, then you move forward. Do you need our vote?
The existing agreement requires, in some form or fashion, a public hearing. So there's a stipulation in 13.3 of the existing agreement that requires mutual agreement of any amendment or termination of this. An extension, in this essence, with redaction of certain sections, it would be considered an amendment. Therefore, we would be required to have to come before you for that approval and or adoption of that amendment as part of the article that exists in that agreement.
Okay, so in October, we voted against extending,
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
and
So you voted against extending the agreement. So if not reconsidered, the agreement would sunset, and we would have to leverage our existing development agreement process no differently for individual applications that come through today for reunion going forward until a new agreement was in place. I'm looking to Matt. I guess if the agreement was to expire, you could do a new short-term 6-month CDA, but you're right back at coming before you in, if I'm doing the math, June of next year with a much longer-term CDA.
right. You're already in negotiations on the new language. You don't have the new language in writing, or do you?
We do not have we have the new language that we have been preparing internally to have a conversation with Reunion here at the turn of the new year in January. We have been preparing and pulling from what we have heard on the 25th and looking at that existing document to make sure that we are capturing that correctly, but also at the same time making sure at the staff level with our basic template and or established process, what we want to be able to position forward. So it's not as, I would say, streamlined and or quick, because once again, we are trying to be smart. Let me just call it what it is. We're trying to be smart on what we put forward to ensure that we are ensuring the right amount of leverage that is being applied to that agreement on both sides, so that we are able to accomplish goals. We have goals, they have goals. So we want to make sure that the terms and the conditions that we want to put forward are comprehensive of the concerns of our community and are able to leverage some of our established processes that are already in place.
Then if you're going to strike items from the existing agreement that we voted to not extend, but if you strike items from it, that still has to be voted on, and it still wouldn't happen until after it expires on December 17th.
No, ma'am. So depending upon the items that you strike from the CDA, and Matt and I still have to have a conversation. There's a couple ways that it can be looked at. Some of the items in the existing CDA superseded the land development code, the municipal code requirements, and in some cases, maybe even charter. That's questionable, but that's something that we have to look at. But the sections that we're proposing to strike from that are sections that, once again, either flew in the face, conflicted, and or superseded the land development code and municipal code. If you extract those sections out, it becomes a document that can be approved by public hearing through a subject resolution. That's my professional opinion.
What about the 1% and 3%? That would be stricken as well, correct?
So yes, that would have required an act of an ordinance, because once again, you are adopting an authority or a power that is not contemplated under the land development code or the municipal code in this case. If you're not including that and you simply allow the sales and use tax incentive agreement, the key thing there is that that's a separate agreement. There's reference points within the CDA to that agreement. But if we are pulling that out, extracting that out, and allow that sales and use tax incentive agreement to expire, it still meets the test for what Oakwood and the city are looking to achieve with that coordinated effort.
Then I still say I would allow it to expire on December 17th as we voted. And if someone wants to try a rescission tonight, I suppose they can do that too. But I would still continue to vote for it to expire. And then on the 20th, bring us back one with language that we understand what's been stricken and what hasn't. That would be the 6-month extension. If Oakwood is interested in being a community member, then they will certainly be willing to do that.
And if I may, ma'am, just to clarify, it was our intent, if that 13th meeting went forward, just so that I'm clear, to make sure that you all understood where I was coming from, and I know I can be confusing from time to time, is that on the 13th, we would bring forward that new amended and restated agreement that would have pulled out those sections of the existing CDA for your consideration. No different than what you're asking for December 20th.
Well, apparently there was discussion going on behind the scenes that set up the 13th as a particular date for a special meeting. I wasn't privy to those meetings, but I still would allow it to expire on the 17th.
Councilmember Hurst.
Yeah, there was some communications about getting a second for a special meeting approval. That's it. Plain and simple, you need 2 people, or 3 people by charter. So, of course, there was communications trying to establish that. Just so happened that I had a death in the family that stopped me from putting this in writing, because to me, we've removed what we've all complained about, and we are trying to move forward by approving what exposes us to liability, in my opinion. Approving the extension to remove those liabilities as we move forward, because if we don't agree to whatever is on the 20th, now those liabilities are then extended until whenever the final approval comes through. So I fully agree that the tax agreement has to be rewritten, restated, and a lot of discussion needs to go with that. What I'm concerned about is development moving forward, not under a master agreement. What we're doing is asking them to go above and beyond the standard, and that's what the agreement allows them to do. But if you don't have that in place, then you can do it based off just like everybody else does with individual development plats, and that's how you get this hodgepodge of development. Not saying we can't fix that quickly. I'm just saying if there's a well thought out amendment that gets us to where we need to be, so we can have those good discussions with the tax agreement, with the future development agreement, and kind of tying those two together and putting a path forward on when and how projects are funded, then I'm supportive of that. I'm not supportive of moving forward with the current standard, current setup.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you, Mayor. And then I was just looking for clarification from either Mr. Rogers or Mr. Hayter. If the agreement expires, an extension is no longer an option, correct?
Legally, we could retroactively extend something. So I think we could extend something and backdate it. Does that make sense?
I understand what backdating means. It just doesn't seem like that would be an option. Once a contract expires, it seems like it's done.
I guess my question is, like, we're free to contract however we want. So there's nothing that would legally prevent us from doing that, although it might seem illogical. We can certainly agree with the other party to do so.
It just doesn't seem like a good way to conduct business, I suppose.
Any other discussion? Okay, we have a motion and a second to discuss what we would want to have in a negotiation for extending the consolidated development agreement for the Reunion Master Development Community. Do a roll call vote. Mr. Gibson?
Certainly, Mayor. Give me just one moment here. Councilmember Madera, Councilmember Davis. I'm sorry, what was that?
Can you turn your
Councilmember Davis,
microphone?
can you repeat?
Can you turn your microphone on so that the recording can pick up your voice, please?
Aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Noble,
No.
Councilmember Hurst,
Yes.
Councilmember Grimes,
Yes.
Councilmember Ford,
Yes.
Councilmember Douglas,
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas,
No.
Mayor Huseman.
No.
Motion fails 4-4.
Okay. Any other administrative council business? Councilmember Noble.
Thank you. I have to bring it up 1 second. On Thursday, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment is asking the public to weigh in on a permit that will limit pollution and place more conditions on Suncor Oil Refinery. The draft permit is more restrictive than Suncor previously had. It will further protect Sand Creek and downstream waters for recreation, aquatic life, agriculture, and drinking. I would like for the city to be able to make a public statement at the next meeting, which is Thursday, December 9th. The meeting is at 6:30 p.m. This is before the Water Quality Control Commission. We have taken positions on this previously.
Can you restate your motion for me?
I move to appoint a person to testify on behalf of Commerce City at the public comment meeting on Thursday, December 9th at 6:30 before the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment on the Suncor water quality permit draft.
Will that testimony be in favor of or against?
Pardon me?
Will that testimony be in favor of or
Oh,
against?
yes, sorry, would be in favor of the draft agreement and the strongest possible regulations
Thank you.
for
Have
Suncor regarding water.
have a motion to send somebody to be chosen to testify in support of the draft water quality policy concerning Suncor and discharges into the South Platte River and Sand Creek Regional Greenway. Is there a second?
I'll second that, please.
Councilmember Douglas?
Yes, I'll second that, please.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second for that. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Hurst?
Are we gonna change? I know we kind of wrote a written submission last time. Are we changing anything, or how? What's the anticipated? And then they ask, what's the anticipated kind of speaking? How are we gonna figure that out? What I'm saying is, I have no problem with us being in support and sending somebody, but I don't think it should just be like freehand. I think we should have like a statement prepared that we all agree upon.
I agree. And it is different. Councilmember Hurst, previously, we had a statement on the anti-degradation rule that had exempted Suncor. This time, the state is establishing higher minimum regulations for water quality from the Suncor facility. We have been involved in this as a stakeholder, but they're taking public comment on Thursday night.
Just last question. Again, I just wanted to make sure that we, like we did in the past, just have a path forward on this. Is this one specifically just for Suncor, or is it for Sand Creek with kind of everybody that's?
This is specifically Suncor.
Okay.
Suncor had a PFAS level well over 1,000 previously, and so it would establish, for example, a 70 parts per billion level for it, among other things on the list.
I think I've made my position on PFAS well known in the past, but is the Water Board using anything from the EPA as a guideline? Because I know the EPA is looking into regulating PFAS.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other
And so
discussion?
could staff then help prepare something? I mean, I would, if the mayor is available, it would be great for the mayor to speak, of course. It carries more weight.
Any other discussion? Councilmember Grimes?
Is it possible for staff to draft comments and have council review them before the 9th?
I think that would be a quick turn since today's the 6th.
We certainly can make our best effort to get that done. We have the past information that was submitted, so we could use that as the template.
Thank you.
So would we have the opportunity then to vote on this motion once the comments are drafted?
That would only be possible either through an email going out to everybody with approval, which I know the city attorney's office doesn't like doing. There is also another hearing on Saturday, January 8th at 9:30 a.m. Given the timetable of what's coming up, and unfortunately this email from the Water Quality Commission didn't come out until late last week to allow us to really plan for this. It would be my preference that we not testify on Thursday, December 9th, that we actually change this up so that we are directing staff to prepare remarks to be voted on at the December 20th meeting, and then the testimony that the city give actually be at the January 8th, 2022 meeting, which is a Saturday at 9:30 a.m. There's two different public comment meetings that could be there, and instead of trying to rush this through with a clunky process of trying to approve the comments, I think we could space this out a little bit, still be able to adequately put the city's position in the record at the public comment, but do so in a manner that provides everybody an opportunity to weigh in on what we want that testimony to say.
I'm good with January 8th. if that's a better fit, just so we don't miss the opportunities. There are 2 public comments. One is December 9th and one is January 8th.
Right. So, given that, would you be amenable to withdrawing your motion and putting forth a different motion for drafting comments for approval at the December 20th meeting for testimony to occur at the January 8th meeting?
Yes. So
Okay.
moved.
And Councilmember Douglas, you seconded the motion. Are you okay with withdrawing your motion?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, that motion to testify on December 9th has been withdrawn. Councilmember Noble, you stated as so moved, so I presume you were making a motion to have staff prepare comments for approval at the December 20th City Council meeting for testimony at January 8th's meeting at the public comment period for the draft Suncor water permit. Councilmember Douglas?
Oh.
Are you seconding that motion?
Yes, I do. Thank
I
you.
have a motion and a second to do that. Is there any other discussion? Seeing no other discussion, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Is that what's that? You're an aye, okay. Okay, motion carries unanimously 8-0. Is there any other administrative council business? Seeing none, we have one item that is there concerning an esports letter. This week, or last week actually, I received an email from Michelle Claymore. They are trying to host an esports tournament and awards ceremony here in the metro area, and requested my signature on a letter of support for the event, as well as offering the beautiful soccer stadium to our east as a potential venue for doing that. Looking for a motion and a second to ratify the letter of support and affix my signature on it. Councilmember Grimes?
So moved.
Councilmember Hurst?
Second.
Does anybody have any questions? Any discussion? Have a motion and a second to ratify the letter of support and affix my signature on it. All those in favor
You
signify.
did have a hand up for discussion,
I
sir.
did? I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What's the potential attendance of an event like this?
Who knows? I can tell you,
18,000
esports
people?
esports is huge, and I mean, if they could fill the venue over there, that's an 18,000 roughly seat stadium. Who knows how all that would take place, but it would potentially the ball arena serving 24,000 people. So, yeah.
Yeah,
But-
understood. I'm just curious how we could take a position like that I'm supportive, but I'm curious how we could take that position if we can't even host our own residents in council chambers. Maybe more of a rhetorical question, but
Thank you. And keep in mind, though, that is an outdoor venue. Any other discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries 8-0 with one excused absence. One last time, any other administrative council business anybody wishes to discuss? Seeing none, we'll move on to council reports. Mr. Tinklenberg.
Thank you, Mayor. In terms of COVID activity, the Adams County incident rate for the last 2 weeks is 575.8 per 100,000. So that means the transmission rate is very high. But on the other hand, hospitalizations appear to be dropping recently. So again, mixed message on that. In terms of vaccinations, Adams County, 1 dose, 81% of the population have 1 dose, and 73.9% have 2 doses. We're continuing to comply with the mask order in city facilities and on the job. In terms of city manager office activities, staff have started meeting monthly with Hickenlooper's office, Senator Hickenlooper, and that's to communicate Commerce City interests as well as support grant applications and build relationships. In terms of community development, Active land use cases are holding steady, slightly down from the high. They're at 175, so 175 active cases that staff are working on currently. We also have an application for a 84,000 square foot warehouse facility, which is proposed for the current drive-in property at Rosemary and 88th Avenue. So that would be of general interest. Also, we have a PUD permit submitted for retail units at 7255 Monaco Street. And for those of you that are not familiar with that property, that's the old Derby bowling alley, so in Derby. In terms of emergency rental assistance, housing staff have obligated $1,298,000 as of last week. And then we also have another $1.3 million that will be available to us. In terms of code enforcement activity, they had 234 cases last week, but they also had a 98% compliance rate, which is what we always strive for, is trying to get people to comply voluntarily. In terms of graffiti, snow removal, weeds, and other abatements for the coming year, they're lining up multiple contractors to have those available to provide those services. Village Crest, wanted to give you an update on Village Crest. A number of residents, community members had addressed City Council several meetings back regarding problems that they were encountering at Village Crest. The Housing Authority staff and code enforcement staff met with residents today regarding those issues and conducted inspections. They have found multiple issues and are working with the regional manager to get the issues resolved. The regional manager has indicated that he wants to work with us to resolve those issues, so that's good news. In terms of economic development, Adams County has a COVID-19 grant program, and they're accepting applications until December 15 from nonprofits, school districts, special districts, and businesses and non-governmental organizations that provide targeted services that meet the county's priorities, or for businesses needing additional economic recovery and relief assistance. And then also economic development is working with a potential developer of a food truck park in the northern range. I don't have a location at this point, but just that concept is being explored with a private party. In terms of human resources, wanted to give you an update on the judge recruitment. Human resources is reviewing applications to make sure that they meet the minimum criteria, and they will be getting the qualified applications out to council later this month. And so I would anticipate the first opportunity for council to discuss those applications would be on January 3. So just so you know the tentative timeline at this point. Turning to Parks, Recreation, and Golf, their winter dance recital was successful. That happened yesterday on Sunday. They had 2 performances with 45 dancers in each performance, and they had sold out both performances at 200 spectators attending each. We have a homeless working group internally. Staff is working right now to identify a safe parking concept. Also, staff has been meeting with Adams County and other cities' staff regarding the homelessness issue, and we have expressed the interest in working regionally so that we can multiply the impact of our money that council has targeted towards that effort. An update on the park ranger recruitment that is underway with interviews. Adams County Open Space Grant, you received word previously that the city will receive $1.5 million grant from Adams County Open Space, and that's to support the Buffalo Run irrigation project. That official award happens tomorrow, December 7 at 9:30, and that's with the county commissioners at their headquarters building. Turning to Public Works, the 88th Avenue widening project, we had submitted a raise grant, and that was not awarded. Meanwhile, design work has continued on, and we are at 90% design on that project. 108th Avenue construction, that is being built by a private company, IOV. They are developing facility on 108th Avenue just east of Havana. And the initial walkthrough was done, and now we will have a follow-up walkthrough that's scheduled for later this week to review status of punch list items. 112th Avenue, Chambers to Parkside, staff did a final walkthrough and found additional broken concrete and also the need for crack sealing on Chambers. And so the contractor is working on repairs, and that's estimated to be complete by the end of this month. In terms of the facility assessment projects that were approved by council, the replacement of the fire sprinkler system, we have the design team that's been on site, and they estimate completion by the 20th of this month. Eagle Point, additional lighting upgrades, that's completed. Contour Community Center, replacement of baseboard heater, that's going to be completed by the 17th of this month. Child Care Center, which is leased to the school district, Adams 14. There's asphalt-related work, and that is anticipated to be finished by the 17th of this month as well, in addition to concrete flat work there that needs to be done, all to be done by the 17th. Paradise Island, repair of the security system, that is in process, and the contractor has been on site and is now waiting on parts, and the contractor has no firm date yet on deliverables. Also, the Child Care Center, there was to be added exterior lights. That is completed. Buffalo Run Golf Course, concrete flat work, that is to be done by the 10th of this month, so later this week. In addition, there was severe rutting on 88th Avenue near Rosemary. The Public Works staff and contractor assistants milled down humps and filled in the ruts with asphalt, so smoothing out that intersection. And then the winter decorations, they have installed the first delivery, and they're waiting on the second delivery of those decorations. If there are no questions on that, we can turn to the agenda review. I see it's up on the screen. Thank you.
Councilmember Grimes.
I just had one question on the dance recital. Where was that held at?
As I recall, that was at Bison Ridge. Yes.
With 200 people in attendance?
At each, yes. Again, required to be masked.
I'm just really struggling with why we can't come back to Chambers with our residents if require a mask. But it seems crazy to me that we're all over town, grocery shopping, at dance recitals. We're everywhere, but we can't invite our residents to come back to Chambers.
So the problem that we encounter is the 12-foot separation for speakers. And at the dance recital, the audience was not speaking. So, and that's why council members are separated this far, because when you're speaking, you're allowed to be unmasked, but you have to be 12-foot distance from the other participants.
Is there anything you can do to circumvent that 12-foot requirement? Because it's mind-blowing at this point. I mean, I went to the Performing Arts Center to see The Lion King last week, and I'm sitting shoulder to shoulder with people, and the performers are unmasked and on stage. And, I don't know what the requirements are in Denver, but it just seems like there's an elephant in the room, and I don't understand why we can't come back to normal operations here, or some version of normal operations. I may be alone, but I'd love to hear other council's feedback.
Councilmember Douglas?
Yes, I agree. I don't see why we can't set it up last week. Thank you so much for accommodating my family, who was thrilled to be here, and we made it work last week. So why can't the public come back and call this home again? We can do it. We can figure it out.
Member Noble?
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Tinglenberg, but he's saying that if there are people who don't want to wear masks, then it's 12 feet. If everyone wears a mask, then it's 6 feet. So that would then present a different situation. He also stated earlier in the COVID report that there has been quite a spike in infections, certainly. I mean, I have very mixed emotions about it, too. I don't see why we can't have the community here. I much prefer seeing people eye to eye. I don't like to have quasi-judicial hearings where the only people present are the developers, and we can't see residents who might want to speak as well. They have to be on Zoom or something, and we can't even see their faces. So there is quite an imbalance. It's very challenging. I don't fault the decisions that you're making, Mr. Tinklenberg, at all. It would be very difficult to do, and I know you have an entire staff to worry about as well. But we did do a survey of all of the other communities, and the other communities have tended to be more liberal than we have here in Commerce City with regards to meetings.
We are just trying to be in compliance with the Tri-County Health Order, and so that's the basis for the decision so far. But we're here at the direction of council.
If I may, when the public health order came out, the most recent one, I did provide council with analysis, and frankly, the most liberal interpretation I can make of that to try to get people in the room without masks, because I know that's been your desire. But that was as far as I was willing to interpret that public health order at that time. If you want to be masked, you can sit on the dais and you can have a room full of people. But to comply with the public health order, masks will be required. And I do not believe that there was a 6-foot distancing requirement that's still in place associated with that. I would need to double check on that, though.
May I state the obvious? We're sitting here masked anyhow. So I don't see how it would be much different to put us on the dais or to set it up like we've had forums in the past with a set of tables in front of the dais so we could space further. Also, I see other communities challenging these health orders, and I'm not suggesting that I'm smarter than our public health officials, but we're doing our residents a disservice by not including them in these meetings in person. And there are precautions in place, masks, vaccinations, and I think everyone has made their selections about what precautions they want to take. And I think it's also on our residents to decide if they want to come be here with us in person. And so I would like to see us challenge that just a little bit so that we can act in a way that communities around us are acting.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I think until we get further direction and further from clarification, I don't think we should challenge any other advice at this point from the Tri-County Health Department. And I do, until we have clarification as to what we can do, maybe by the next meeting if Roger can present us with that. But for the safety of our residents, we need to realize we don't speak for all residents. There is residents in Commerce City that don't feel safe coming to Commerce City chambers. So we don't have the right to speak, but they do have that option. But until we get clarification, I don't think, we should proceed with trying to argue this and that about the distance and everything until it's clarified by Matt and Roger to protect the safety of and health of our residents as well. Thank you.
Councilmember Hurst?
I think I've been pretty clear on my position on all this stuff, but I still don't see how there is a situation that appointed bureaucrats hold weight over elected officials for longer than 30 days. A 30-day declaration of emergency to give bureaucratic power while legislation is passed seems to make sense, but beyond 30 days, this is getting ridiculous. This is almost 2 years in. So yeah, at this point, personally, could care less what Tri-County Health says.
Any other questions regarding the city manager's report? Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. I had a few questions to Roger, and thanks for your report. But for graffiti cleanup, is that for businesses and residents? Does that fall, if they need assistance with cleaning up graffiti? Is there assistance through the city, or are they responsible for themselves to clean the graffiti up?
I would defer to Mr. Rogers on that, but I believe that private businesses are responsible for their own, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Thank you, Roger. That is correct. Private businesses are responsible for their own graffiti cleanup. We do budget on an annual basis about $75,000 for graffiti abatement or assistance in an instance when we've had non-compliance. I do believe community development is looking at a more proactive program, but in this respect, when we have those issues, right now we have only one firm that we're able to go out to, and timeliness has been an issue from time to time over the past year. So they are looking at, once again, expanding that so that if we have multiple issues, we have multiple timelines that we could be able to meet and have a much faster response and resolution to the matter.
Okay. So like if it's more, say like if it's a strip mall or, more than one business location, is the property owner of that building responsible then?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, and then I was just hoping if you guys could look into, you mentioned that there may be a food truck in the northern range. If you could talk to whoever's exploring that possibility to encourage them to eventually coming to do something like that in the south area on certain days also.
We certainly can do that, but again, it's a private venture, so where they decide to go is their decision, but yes.
All right. Okay, thank you.
I was going to say, and to that point, Roger, we've actually kind of slid that to them as well as part of these conversations about future locations.
Any other questions for the city manager regarding his report? Seeing none, if you want to do the agenda review.
Sure, thank you. So December 13, we have the second orientation session starting at 5:30. And then the study session includes presentations regarding the 2022 and 2023 special election and redistricting plans. Also a presentation regarding the comprehensive plan current conditions report, as well as the drainage impact fee, road impact fee presentation as a follow-up to the one that happened previously. And then following that meeting, there'll be a legislative subcommittee meeting, which would be for reviewing your priorities for the legislative session coming up. On December 20, we would have the third orientation session, again at 5:30, and that would be followed by an Urban Renewal Authority meeting. The presentations for that meeting are the purpose of the Urban Renewal Authority, a review of the projects that are underway, such as the Mile High Greyhound Park, and then also a presentation regarding public art at the Mile High Greyhound Park, as well as a presentation about the amended and restated loan agreement from the city. Just as general background, the city has loaned over $13 million to the Urban Renewal Authority That was for the purchase of the property originally and also demolition of the old dog track facility, as well as various other measures such as design. For example, we brought in a design firm to do a conceptual design of the commercial area. So it's a variety of items that have been covered by that $13 million. And then that would be followed by an executive session, and that would be to determine positions and instructing negotiators relative to the continued engagement of Regen as the authority's owner representative. What the owner's representative has done for us is worked with the developer, the master developer, to work out details and monitor their construction projects, because they were responsible, using money from us, responsible for building public improvements. And so we wanted to make sure that that money was spent on the items that we required, and that it was spent wisely, and that he has done for us. On December 20, also, we have the council meeting, and the consent agenda will include an amendment amending the 2022 budget, which you took initial action on tonight, and then also Resolution 2021-110, which would be to authorize intergovernmental agreement between the city and the Urban Renewal Authority regarding that loan agreement. And then also a public hearing authorizing the submission of a consolidated annual performance, and that's called a CAPER, and that's for Community Development Block Grant Program, and that submission is required each year. And then under administrative business, we have the list of 2022 proclamations, which would list the proclamations that would be anticipated for the year. Scroll down, do we have anything else that day? No, nothing else that day. The 27th is canceled. That was done by council previously. And then January 3 would be our next meeting. And again, that would be orientation session number 4, followed by a regular meeting of the council. And items so far on that agenda are the environmental planning, policy, and oil and gas monthly update, the private activity bond allocation presentation, and an executive session regarding positions and negotiations relative to the annexation agreement for property south of 104th Avenue and west of Highway 85. It's also known as Commerce Place, but that's between basically Brighton Boulevard and Highway 85. So those are the items on the agenda so far. As I've mentioned previously, there are items that seem to come up in the interim, and but this is the list as we have it so far.
Thank you, Mr. Tingelberg. Does anybody on council have any questions regarding the upcoming agendas or wish to see any changes? Seeing none, thank you very much, sir. We'll move on to our interim city attorney, Mr. Hayter.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here tonight, but I have nothing to report for you this evening.
Thanks, sir. Do any council members wish to make a report? Councilmember Hurst.
Yeah, I just want to make council aware of some discussions. Although I would consider them preliminary right now, they are happening quickly. And it has to do with the 88th interchange with E470. I think E470 came with concerns. I think the city did a very good job responding. And coming out of that, there's a future planned meeting to get the decision makers to sit in the room and talk about kind of the future development of the area, what's going east of E470, and how that interchange needs to accommodate and account for all of that, while still looking at the Apple Green development in the E470 corridor right away. So I think those conversations are good. I wanted to bring that to everybody's attention in case there is a hinge point that we have to vote on. It won't be completely, unbeknownst to everybody here, but right now I think the conversations have been positive and should continue to be positive, but did want to make sure that everybody was aware that E470 and the city are having discussions around building that interchange with the current project that's going from I-70 to 104th to expand 3 lanes in both directions, 2 3 lanes, so additional 1 lane in both directions on E470.
Councilmember Noble.
Thank you, Mayor. I attended the sponsored tree decorating event at Reunion Coffee House. There's zillions of trees. They look really beautiful, and these trees will be donated to families in need in Commerce City. So if you have a family who could use a Christmas tree, please check in with Reunion Coffee House so you can submit on their behalf. I also attended the public viewing of Suncor Sundown documentary and panel discussion at Yellow Rose, and the public Zoom meeting on upcoming regulations on oil and gas air monitoring hosted by the CDPHE Environmental Justice Division. I'd also like to do a shout out to Maria Gonzalez. On Saturday night, we were watching the news, and as you may know, she has been at the flea market every Saturday and Sunday as the head of Adelante, along with her team, to facilitate vaccinations, COVID vaccinations for the community. And on Saturday, the team of professionals who would give those vaccinations didn't show, so there were scores of people who weren't able to get their vaccinations, and it just broke her heart at the thought that they wouldn't be able to come back on Sunday or another time. But I am so impressed by Maria's commitment to the community, to her community, and I just really, really wanted to pay my respects to Maria Gonzalez tonight and thank her for all she does for Commerce City.
Any other council members wishing to make a report? Councilmember Douglas.
Yes, thank you. I also attended the preview of the mini documentary Suncor Sundown at the Yellow Rose. I wanted to also thank the proprietors at the Yellow Rose for donating the space. They are so community oriented, and they always come through with providing a space for community events. I also attended my first youth commission meeting, and I can see that it's going to be the perfect fit for me. It was a great meeting, and I think we're going to accomplish great things, and I'm very excited about that. I also sat in on the RAC meeting on Friday morning. That's a Regional Air Quality Commission meeting. And then I sat in on the CDPHE Environmental Justice Forum that was held on Saturday morning. I'd like to give a shout out to my daughter, our daughter, who is 30 today, Paige Douglas. Happy birthday. And so proud of all the accomplishments that she's made, her 30 years here with us. The one thing that I noticed at both the showing of the documentary Suncor Sundown and also at the CDPHE is that they gave a land acknowledgement to recognize the fact that we are on native grounds and to show our respect. And I would like to suggest that maybe we explore the possibility of doing that, following the Pledge of Allegiance every week. So if we could do that, I'd really appreciate it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Any other council members wishing to make a report? Seeing none. I don't have anything officially to report, but I do want to comment. discussion that we were having concerning masks indoor and all that. You know, this weekend, Jen and I needed to go purchase some items for a Christmas tree for Stewart Middle School. And we wanted to go to Dick's Sporting Goods. And I drove to Broomfield to go to Dick's Sporting Goods. And I think that whenever you have municipalities out there that do not have the same restrictions as other municipalities, people will continue to make decisions that have a negative financial impact on the businesses in the community. Would have been a lot easier for me to just drive up the road to the Dick's Sporting Goods there in Prairie Center, but I chose to go to Broomfield for the freedom. And I'm sure that there are a lot of other people out there that will continue to make that decision. So it's unfortunate that that's the situation that we're in across this metro area, where people are making decisions financially that impact the businesses that need the support just because of freedom and choice. That being said, I'm going to give one last opportunity. Anybody want an administrative council business item? Councilmember Noble?
I just wanted to ask a quick question. The retail consultant that the city has, the last time we saw her was in September of 2000. And I know that she is on a consulting contract. Are we to get a report or hear from her again, or what's the situation there?
Thank you, Councilmember Noble. That's a great question. We have been talking internally about how we can provide updates from Ms. Katie Press to council, and in particular to BREDAC. I should be able to have, not just to you, but to the full council, more information as to what that looks like. We anticipate that there will probably be some information coming your way at the beginning of the new year, turn of the new year, but that's all I can offer at this time.
Well, that would be great, because it is of concern to residents, and we're talking 15 months by January, so it would be good, since the last time we heard from her.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks.
Councilmember Grimes?
I'd like to move to direct staff to present a plan to council to bring us back to chambers to include residents
Councilmember Hurst? I have a motion and a second to direct staff to bring council back to chambers fully to include residents participating in council meetings. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Hurst?
Can I ask for an addition of, as Councilwoman or Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas said, not everybody is going to be comfortable coming back, and that's completely understandable. So if we can have a way for public comment to still occur in a hybrid format, there are people who are going to make their own decisions because they have a higher risk, but still need to have a voice. I fully support that, and I fully support them making their own decision on whether to come in or not.
I think that can be fleshed out in the plan that staff comes back with, so I don't think we need to have a motion on that. Councilmember Noble?
I would support that if there was a requirement that everyone wears a mask. My husband and I have gone 18 months now without a cold or the flu or any other kind of virus, including COVID. So we are very compliant. There is a rule in stores and restaurants that you go in with your mask on, and there are places in Commerce City where people are not complying with the stores, and you're putting others at risk. A council member said at one point that wearing a mask protects themselves. No, it doesn't. Wearing a mask protects the other person. Them wearing a mask protects you. So that's the only way I would support it, is if we required masks until we learn from public health officials and scientists that we don't need to wear masks anymore. Thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add, I do think we would still need to make sure that we do have a virtual option for all of our residents if they chose to do that. And if the numbers increased, any council members if they chose to do so, would have a option for virtual meetings, because like I said, I can't stress enough. This COVID is here. It seems like it's going to be here forever. And some people are saying, yes, we need to get in session and start being together again. But I do think, too, there's still so much unknown. And I do think we still need to protect the residents. So I still think we should still have the virtual option as well for our residents, and also that masks are required until we have more information. Thank you.
Councilmember Douglas?
I would agree with all of that, both Councilwoman, Member Noble and Alan Thomas. We need to have the people come back and join us and to have that option, but they need to know that they have to wear a mask when they're in the building. And my husband Steve has been wearing a mask every day for 8 to 10 hours while he's been working at King Soopers, and he wears it faithfully, and he feels like he is being disrespected if he has customers come in who refuse to wear a mask. He is a frontline worker. He puts his life on the line, especially at the beginning of this pandemic. And wearing a mask is a sign of respect. I also have a daughter-in-law who is a hairdresser. She wears a mask, and she has also made the same comment that she has not had a cold, flu, anything while wearing since she's been wearing a mask and doing her job. So yes, definitely a mask, but I would like to see people be able to come back.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, motion and second is to direct staff to prepare a plan to bring everybody back and open this council chambers up to the community. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay.
Nay.
It's going to pass 6-2 with one excused absence. Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Noble will be in the nays. Okay, that concludes all the council business we have. We will adjourn that meeting and move directly into our ECA GID meeting. Mr. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Chair Huseman,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas,
Present.
Board Member Madera, Board Member Davis, Board Member Noble,
Present.
Board Member Hurst,
Present.
Board Member Grimes,
Present.
Board Member Ford, Board Member Douglas,
Present.
Chair Huseman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. We have one item on our agenda, which is an ordinance on second reading. It is Ordinance ECA GID 016-21, including portions of certain lands generally known as the Reunion Commercial Center. Staff is available to answer questions should anybody on council have any. Seeing no request for questions, looking for a motion and a second to approve by the board as seated and on second read and final reading ordinance ECA GID-016-21. Board Member Grimes?
So moved.
Board Member Hurst?
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve on second and final reading as seated by the board ordinance ECA GID 016-21. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, we'll do a roll call vote.
Board Member Madera, Board Member Davis,
Aye.
Board Member Noble,
Yes.
Board Member Hurst,
Yes.
Board Member Grimes,
Yes.
Board Member Ford,
Yes.
Board Member Douglas,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas,
Yes.
Mayor Huseman,
Yes.
passes unanimously with one excused absence.
Thank you. We will adjourn the ECA GID meeting. At this time, we will start actually, we're going to take a 5-minute break so anybody can use the facilities if they need to. Then we will start the legislative subcommittee meeting. We all go home.
We good to start, sir?
Yep.
All right, good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council. Welcome to those council members I have not yet met. My name is John Borgelli. I'm a management analyst in the city manager's office. I also coordinate our legislative affairs at the state and federal level. Tonight, we will be talking more about the state level, but I can also answer any questions you have about our federal efforts as well. Before we dive into this 2022 State Legislative Issues Guide pamphlet that you should have received a copy of earlier today, just a broader overview of what this document is and how it informs our lobbying efforts. The city does retain an advocate, which is I think what lobbyists prefer to be called now, at the state level, and one also at the federal level as well. This document at the state level is what guides their actions, as well as these regular legislative subcommittee meetings during the session to provide them specific direction on certain bills or measures during the year. In the absence of that, though, they rely on this guide to inform them of the city's positions, both specifically on particular matters and in broad philosophical strokes as well. Getting into the guide itself, there's 4 parts to it, and this is mostly the same from last year with 2 major additions that I will cover as we go through. The first section, which does have our first edition, is an about section. So this pamphlet is provided to all of our state delegates, our state representatives, and state senators to inform them of our positions. The first is a little bit of just overview information about the city. Our first edition here that I will keep with council's approval, where we used to have a picture of the Civic Center, we now have something calling out our diversity. This is something that the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Commission proposed that we include in this about section. This is just data from the U.S. Census Bureau calling out some of the notable categories in which the city averages diverge widely from the state. So are the categories in which we are the most diverse. Give you a moment to look at that, and I'll move on through this review.
Mr. Borgelli, can you pause for a moment? Councilmember Hurst.
Mr. Borgelli, do you know if that's the most current census data, or it doesn't matter? I just wanted to know for my...
This is from the American Community Survey, so this is 2019 data.
Perfect, thank you. I just was hoping it wasn't 2010
No,
census
sir.
data. Thanks.
You'll also notice that we have updated City Council's new goals with the wording that Council chose during the winter retreat earlier this year. Now, the second section is specific legislative priorities. This is Council's positions on more specific issues, more technical, as opposed to the next section, which speaks more in theoretical or philosophical terms. There are no additions or changes from the previous year's booklet to this section. If any member of council does have something that they would like to see included in this specific legislative priority session, that's something we can discuss tonight. We are looking to finalize this booklet and what's in it at next week's meeting, so we can get this out to our state representatives and senators ahead of our legislative dinner with them, which is scheduled for that first week in January. So if you have something that you'd like to add now, we can workshop that now, or if there's something that you'd like to send to me during the week, I can bring that back at the next meeting as well.
Councilmember Hurst.
I think the one thing that I saw missing in here based off of the feedback that I've received is public safety. Some of the recent legislation that's occurred, especially last year, but in the last 2 years, at least from a certain perspective, has had a very negative impact on the court's ability to hold people accountable for their actions. And it's created an environment where it's almost incentivized repeat laws to be broken, if I don't know the best way to say that. Similar to auto car thefts, burglary, and all the other increased spike in numbers that we've seen from a public safety perspective. So wouldn't claim to be the expert on that, but I would say our community has an interest in increasing public safety from what we've seen over the last 2 years.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, a section, you would propose a section that talks about public safety specifically being resistant to state measures that would remove the city's ability to conduct its court and police operations as it best sees fit?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, there's some unfunded mandates, some that we likely agree on as a council, but that there's also, we've heard the judge talk about kind of their authority being taken away. They don't have the ability to run their own court system. But there's much more to that. I don't want to speak for the whole council, so I'm not suggesting that I implant the language into this. I want the council to agree. But as long as the council agrees that public safety needs to be prioritized in legislation moving forward, then I would ask that be added.
Good. Councilmember Ford. Councilmember Douglas.
Good to turn my mic back on. Sorry about that. I would agree with that to include public safety and addressing gun violence as well. Also, because we are a diverse community, I would include immigration reform if everyone is in agreement with that.
Councilmember Grimes.
The only reason I would disagree with making that a priority is because we don't have any authority in that arena. Not that I don't support some measures to immigration reform. I just don't think it's something we would deal with at this level. And I would just add that I also support adding public safety.
Councilmember Hurst.
I would have to say I'm not completely against the immigration reform position because we're just advocating at this point for what we feel is right for our city. Again, I don't think we'll have any impact on writing state public safety policy, but at the same time, we would like our elected representatives to take a closer look and hear from the experts. Similar to that, and I would say immigration reform could go hand in hand with a lot of things. I think there's, in the past we've shown support for dreamers, but, reform could mean a lot of things, and so I think we would need to clarify that. I think having an open border at the southern border right now with no vaccine mandates is immigration reform. So we need to define that. We need to define what we're talking about, or it could be taken a million different directions.
Councilmember Grimes.
I would just add to my previous comments that I'd like to see us support measures that can help us at the local level, help residents who need a path to citizenship, programs that would support those types of initiatives. I would be supportive of that.
All right, so that we can get this drafted, anybody opposed to adding verbiage in here about public safety and legislation? Okay, so let's get something added on that. Immigration reform, anybody opposed to adding comments in there supporting immigration reform? Okay, let's get that added. And we're still going to have an opportunity on what night in order to review this finalized?
Yes, sir. I can draft short statements for both public safety and immigration reform and have them sent out during the week, and we can discuss that and do final wordsmithing next Monday, if that would work for the rest of council.
Any objections? Okay. Anything else anybody wants wordsmithed? Okay.
All right, moving into the third section. This is the guiding legislative principles. These are the larger philosophical underpinnings that inform some of those specific legislative priorities. Again, this is based on not necessarily your own personal positions as a politician, as an elected official, but of the city as a whole, as a municipality. The one major addition to this section, which is otherwise unchanged from last year, is the inclusion of a diversity, equity, and inclusion section. This is with language created in collaboration with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Commission. I will let council read it for a minute, and if you are amenable to that inclusion, we can keep that in there. We can also wordsmith any changes as well.
Councilmember Noble?
If I could, this is a little late to be bringing this up, but we didn't get this until around 3 o'clock, and we had to be here at about 4. So it would be helpful if we got this booklet in advance and could review it in the future. That won't be until next year, but let's try and get it to everyone at least 24 hours in advance, if not more. Thanks.
Any feedback on the inclusion of the DEI statement here? Good.
And the final section is your contact information. We will update that with the pictures taken earlier today and the correct council roster based on the previous elections. Does council have any questions either about this pamphlet or about the legislative subcommittee or legislative affairs in general?
Good.
I have a question about our state lobbyist firm. In the past, they had represented both us and Extraction Oil and Gas. They're shown as lobbying on the same bills, sometimes taking the same stance. In one case, it was the day before we had even had our first legislative session that they gave a position for Commerce City last year. Do they still represent Extraction Oil and Gas, or the new umbrella agency Civitas or Civitas or whatever its new name is?
I cannot speak to that and their current clients. I can look into that for you, though, and get back to you.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Councilmember Hurst?
I'm really promise I'm not trying to be the grammar police or anything, but the second to last sentence on the DEI says
I see that.
we hope to, and then nothing. So if we could just finish
Yes,
that
sir.
up.
Anything else, Mr. Borgelli?
That's all that I have for you this evening, pending any further questions.
Any other questions or comments from council? Seeing none, thank you very much. Have a good evening.